Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick. Welcome to another Fein Points. Here we are with Bruce Fein, of course, for Fein Points, and Richard Miniter has agreed to come back, and we're very happy to have him. And My understanding is Ryan will also be joining us, and so once Ryan comes in, I'll add him to the conversation. Um, so as usually done, I like to give some introductory statements. So today my introductory statements, will be about the firing of the statistician from BLS because Trump did not like the numbers that were reported by the BLS. So one is I think we've seen an administration, and that's why many people say, beginning to, more and more people at least are saying that we're behaving more and more like a banana republic, that we're behaving more like, and why a banana republic? Because historically, banana republic doctors up their economic statistics to make things look differently than the reality of what the circumstances. Uh, Now, there were some significant adjustments, but it's not without precedent that numbers change over time as the seasonal adjustments are made. Seasonal adjustments are routinely made, for a long period of time. Matter of fact, I think years ago when people used to focus on the monetary aggregates like M1 and M2, I saw a paper done by one of the central banks. This is a study I saw 40 years ago, but the study basically demonstrated that the original number that was produced by the Fed on monetary aggregates, they spent 5 years doing adjustments, and by the time they finished with the finally adjusted number was materially different from the original number reported. So the fact that government statistics get put out quickly, so we have a snapshot of what is done. Then we have a seasonal adjustment process and adjustments that are made, and they do their best to make adjustments with the data they have right now. And then they look back and try and refine those adjustments. And so this is pretty common. Now, a reasonable, rational person, someone who is not insane, somebody who has a sense of decency, someone who has any sense of fairness, would call this person up and say, come down and explain to me how you calculated this. Okay. So they would give somebody the opportunity of being able to say, let me walk you through this analysis. Have you seen anyone? You've seen a lot of people say, okay, I agree with the firing. Have anyone had come out and said, here's the real number and here's my substantiation for the real number? Are they going to fire? They think this was all done by one person, not that there's a department working on this. But one person has all the data, and there's one person, she's manipulating all the data, so nobody can check and verify what's being done, and this is not verifiable. Okay? No, this is another example of Trump not wanting people to know the truth. Okay, when the truth is inconvenient, he wants to ban the truth. Okay, when it's bad, you know, and and he wants to replace truth with his bullshit. Okay, why do I think this is important? Okay, I'm going to tell you why I think it's important. Besides the fact that I think that there's just another example of a tyrannical state where people have the fear if they put out a bad statistic that they're going to get fired. So every time they sit back and say, "Gee, you know what?" Because what are we seeing now? Okay, we're seeing now that the employment numbers are not great. They're bad. We're seeing inflation is sticky, not going down. It's marginally going up. And more companies have been making statements saying, we've absorbed these tariffs so far, but given the fact that they seem now to be pretty permanent, okay, we're going to have to try. We're not going to absorb all the cost of these tariffs anymore. We're going to share them. We're going to share the pain. We're going to spread the pain associated with these tariffs. These tariffs are a cost of doing business. Okay, they're not paid for by the exporting country. Okay, they're paid by the party importing into the United States. So they're paid for here, not overseas. They're paid for here in the U.S. by the importing party. So again, for all you who think that China's paying these tariffs and India's paying these tariffs and the UK paying their tariffs, they're not, okay? They're a cost of doing business to people who are doing business in the US, okay? Like any other cost of doing business. And this is a material increase in the cost of doing business, okay? So now we might start seeing, as a consequence of the company saying, I've eaten the cost of these tariffs so far, but I'm not going to eat them all now, and I'm going to start raising prices and see which price increases can stick, and I'm going to then now share the burden between stockholders, employees, and by wage suppression, and consumers by higher prices, or I'll lower the quality of my product and keep the prices the same. I'll substitute cheaper materials. I'll do something where you won't see the price increase, but what you see is you'll see a lower quality product for the same price, which is like a price increase. So, because you're getting less value for the same price. So that's like a price increase. So, now we might see higher inflation numbers. And if you're the statistician producing those inflation numbers, you got to sit back and say, gee, inflation's 3.5%, 4%. Do I tell the truth and get fired, or do I find out what Trump wants the inflation number to be and I justify that number? Then now, if you're an investor, at least the investors kind of rely upon that the statistics they get from the government have a reasonable level of accuracy. So now if the statistics don't have a reasonable level of accuracy, think how important information the marketplace have when they can't trust the numbers that the government will provide. And that's what Trump told the marketplace today. Trump told the marketplace, the other day, he said, I'm not going to give you good statistics anymore. I'm going to circulate Trump bullshit for statistics, and you figure it out, okay? And that's why the market sold off. So there'll be more information on whether this was an outlier, and Trump will say, okay, I get the message from the marketplace that, they don't like me just substituting my own bullshit statistics, for the truth. And we'll have to see, and the market will wait and see if, what happens, in the future. But now there's a greater uncertainty about how much manipulation there'll be of this government statistics. And the irony of this is, at the same time, this administration is manipulating economic statistics, okay? They're accusing Obama and a whole bunch of other people of committing treason for manipulating intelligence assessments, okay? So I guess if they want to mislead the American public about the state of the economy, that's okay, okay? So, we're really debating all the information that we rely upon to understand better the circumstances that we have, and everything is being politicized, converting everything into bullshit, okay? That's
right now. If I can interject.
Jeff, can I get in here? So look, a couple of things wrong with your story, okay? First of all, Trump didn't see a bad number and decide to fire the person. Instead, Trump received a report from the Labor Department, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics is part of. And what they noticed is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I'm talking about the people at labor, of the presidential appointees, what they noticed is that BLS could not tell them, even in an internal conversation, what the numbers were and where the nature of the seasonal adjustment was. In fact, they got a vague and conflicting story that caused them to lose trust in the head of the department. There were statistical anomalies, and they brought them to the White House to seek a decision. At the same time, the Treasury Department was also concerned that if we revealed all of the abnormalities in the calculation of the numbers, abnormalities which, by the way, go back 10, 15 years, right? They've been playing with the numbers, that markets would lose confidence, and Treasury thought that would be a disaster. But Treasury has its own motive. They think that all the economic statistics across the federal government should actually be located in one place, and that one place is Treasury. So there's two other factors going on here. Obviously, the answer to manipulated numbers in one direction is not to manipulate them in the other. The answer is to go back to something like a gold standard, where you announce what your underlying measurements are and how they're calculated, what sources they're pulled from, how large the sample sizes are, and so on, and how your seasonal adjustments are made. If you reveal the drivers, people can better predict the numbers. Another problem with the numbers is they come out so late, right? A properly automated system with public weights should be able to release the numbers within a few days, frankly.
Richard.
Well, hold on. One last point here. So as an analogy, think about the New York Times bestseller list, right? For decades, it was the gold standard in book sales. And how do we know that? Because publishing contracts had bonuses for authors who made it to the New York Times bestseller list. And, I've written 3 New York Times bestselling books. I know a little bit about this. But those clauses in contracts started to disappear about 10, 15 years ago. And now they're gone, right? Very rarely do you see in a writer's contract a bonus for getting on the bestseller list. And the handful of bonuses that remain are not tied to the New York Times list, but are tied to BookScan, right? Which just looks at cash register scanner data and it totals it up, right, through a very transparent system. Why did the New York Times list fall, and why are the BLS numbers in such trouble? Because the New York Times refused to release a list of the bookstores that it takes data from, and it refused to release how that data is adjusted. So if you look at a study of, and this has been done, of New York Times bestseller lists and BookScan bestseller lists, the overlap is not 100%. It's not even 50%. So clearly the New York Times is playing with the numbers, and the market has responded by taking those clauses out of writer contracts. Something similar is happening with BLS. They have an opaque process where they don't reveal how they calculate their numbers and what sources they come from, how seasonal adjustments are made. And just like we need a price rule and a gold standard, or something approaching a gold standard, a fixed exchange rate of, what I'm trying to say is, I don't mean a fixed exchange rate in the economic sense. I mean a clear relationship between two things. The public doesn't trust these numbers. And as you can see, every firm on Wall Street, which 20, 30 years ago would take the government's BLS numbers as gold, now has quants who sit around and make adjustments to their adjustments to try to figure out what the real number is. So I think the BLS has a serious problem. And I think the answer is not just to fire people, but to make the process transparent.
Richard, I got to answer. Right now, the markets don't believe what you said, okay? The markets don't believe what you said. The markets believe the BLS over Trump. The markets believe the BLS over Treasury, okay? The markets, if you give it to the markets, is where do you think you're going to get a better number from, BLS or whatever? I spoke to my friends, big hedge fund managers that day, okay? They all said, I'm not going to trust an economic statistic anymore. They trust BLS more than they trust.
Yeah, well, ask them this question. For how many years have they been hiring quants?
The market didn't sell off. The market didn't sell off because they said, gee, you know what? I'm now going to no longer trust the BLS numbers because Trump told me not to trust them because this number didn't make sense. There already was many people thought that the numbers on the economics were reflecting a strength that they were not seeing. So many people thought the economy was weaker and they were surprised by the strength of it. And when the numbers came out, that's kind of confirming the fact that doing that. And many of these economists and many of these people, yeah, they always verify the numbers. Nobody blindly trusts the numbers that come out of the government. As I said before, the money supply used to be the most important driver of the capital markets when we had inflation, and the original number, the correlation of the original number with the final number after revisions 5 years later it was completely uncorrelated. But everyone who invested in the market said, I understand that this number might not be the final number after it goes through all the revisions, but it's the best number I got. Okay, they didn't think it is a gold standard because a gold standard didn't exist. They understood the weaknesses of the sample size. They understood how the seasonal adjustment process has. And the smarter thing to do, instead of firing somebody, was sending in an auditor. You can audit these things. They're not complicated. Okay, if somebody's decided to say, I have an algorithm, I go back and say, I went through the numbers. You can always reproduce the numbers that somebody used. You go to the question, show me your sample. Get back and say, I can't show you the sample. I don't have a sample. I just made it up. No, they have a sample. Somebody could have gone in and said, show me your sample and show me the adjustments you made. You went through calculations, or did you not go through calculations? Did you run it through a computer, or did you just pick a number out and you threw it out there and you just made these adjustments? Okay, all these things had to be calculated.
Yeah, but Jeff, when the senior management of labor went to BLS and asked for exactly what you're talking about, BLS had no answers. That's the problem. That's why there was the loss of confidence in that individual. Okay.
Can I interject? I apologize here. A couple of observations. One, we know politicians have ulterior motives, to try to manipulate statistics, because they're politicians and they're there for power. It may well be that a bureaucrat who's not a career politician may have biases for other reasons, but we surely know that the politicians always want to manipulate facts in their favor. It's whether Democrat or Republican, they always want to do that. The second thing with regard to the signal that gets sent out, and it's not just this particular BLS employee, but it's also true at the Department of Justice. If you actually explained facts to the court, you got fired. And that's happened already with regard to some of the litigation concerning deportations and immigration. It reminds me of the Chinese Communist Great Leap Forward under Mao Zedong, where the bureaucrats felt that they had to report bountiful crops to Mao to avoid being fired. And meanwhile, 50 or 60 million Chinese starved to death. So they're sending a signal out there. Listen, don't ever say anything politically that might be disagreeable to Mr. Trump or to the cabinet. That's unmistakable. But I want to just move a little bit sideways here to the issue that you addressed, I believe, with regard to tariffs. Now, it does seem to me that one of the great ironies of the Trump economic program, if you call it that, is it has, resemblance to socialism, communism, where the government tries to get involved and regulate every part of the economy. Right now, with regard to South Korea and Japan alone, according to Mr. Trump, he now will control $1 trillion of U.S. investment and decide where it goes, where the profits come from. I said, wow, this makes the Soviet gas plant, look kind of cheap in comparison, right? Really? $1 trillion? Now we have the government. Not only that, it is obvious that the way in which the president is imposing tariffs has nothing to do with any economic sense at all. He doesn't like the way Brazil is treating former President Bolsonaro. Says, okay, 50% surcharge on imports from Brazil. But these are not economically grounded tariffs. They are political tariffs. And we know, and it's whether it's Trump or a successor who comes in, will manipulate tariffs for political purposes. That's why they're politicians. This is what I define as, this is socialism. It's communism. We have the government now regulating ever greater portion of the economy. I mean, even Kamala Harris wasn't as bad as this. And this huge silence out there. This is capitalist, is free market enterprise, and capitalism. It's the opposite of that. And anybody who doesn't think that the exemptions from the tariffs are not going to be swayed by political considerations, it's been Rip Van Winkle and sleeping for 20 years. And this goes completely unremarked.
Yeah. And Richard, I have to say, if you have a source who's telling you this, okay, I think you're being played. Okay. There's no way she came up, and they asked her, where'd you get this number? And she said, I have no idea how I got this number. Okay. I just don't believe that. You know,
No. Okay.
People share information.
Amazing
People
story.
share information that they think government statistics are always a mess. Always a mess. I can tell you this: if the number would have come out saying 3 trillion jobs were created, Trump would have gone out and said, "I'm giving this person a Nobel Prize in economics." Okay, and and this just shows how this is the greatest economy in the history of mankind. He would have not been concerned about whether the number was accurate or not.
Okay, Jeff, just zoom out for a second, then I'd like to go to tariffs. But just to respond to your point, when you do turnarounds at companies, right? This is an analogy with the turnaround of the federal government, to be clear. When you do turnarounds at companies, the people who are afraid of being thrown out from the old regime make all sorts of claims, right? Typical. They say lots of things, and they make allegations of wrongdoing. This is part of the turnaround process. Now, sometimes those people being turned out who make those claims, sometimes they're right, but often they're wrong, and they're motivated by anger at the loss of their position or the tenure, or that they fear that they'll lose their position. And so this kind of resistance, these kinds of claims of wrongdoing, are typical in turnarounds. And we are in the middle of the largest turnaround of the federal government probably since the 1930s, right? I live, on the hill above the Pentagon. My neighbors are, and I see them every day walking my dog and having conversations with them, are admirals, generals, and senior bureaucrats, and actually 2 U.S. senators live on my street, right? So I hear all the time their complaints about Trump, right? It's because they fear losing their jobs. And these people have really not been that productive in their federal careers. Maybe they were in the private sector, but
So you think out of fear of her job, she made a decision of getting fired. She made a decision to guarantee that she would get fired.
No, she was calculating how to preserve her future employment prospects at another organization by deflating the numbers, but at the same time trying to not deflate them so much as to draw the attention of the Trump people at Labor. Now, the fact of the matter is, several senior officials went down to her office at Labor and asked very detailed questions, and her initial answers fell apart, and her secondary answers fell apart. And at that point, there was a complete loss of confidence in the way that department was being run. And that department will probably end up fully restructured and moved to Treasury. That's what I predict will happen over the next 6 months. Right.
Yeah, Richard, with regard to your defense, there hasn't been anything other than adding more money, billions more to the defense. They're not trying to turn around anything with regard to what Eisenhower would call our multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial security complex. What would they have fear to lose? They're getting everything without any oversight, without any questions. Just throw more money at the Defense Department. That's what's happening right now. We're expanding. We go after Iran.
Stephen Feinberg, who is a billionaire, came in as number 2 at defense and is in the middle of a vast restructuring process. The problem is these military contractors are functionally a cartel, right? They were cartelized under Clinton, Bush, and Obama.
Mm-hmm.
They're called the defense primes. And crowbarring them out is quite difficult, but the department appears to be doing it. If you look at its deals with Palantir, its deals with Anduril and other defense tech startups, and what the Defense Innovation Unit is doing, they are trying. That is a vast bureaucracy. That is going to take far more than 4 years to turn around. But is there a lot of waste in defense? Absolutely. Anytime you have cost plus contracts, you have an incentive to drive up costs. And anytime you allow military officers to constantly redesign projects, battleships, boats, weapon systems, etc., constant revisions also drive cost, right? And in the first Trump administration, they bought a design for a low draft landing boat from the Italians, and all they had to do was build more of them. And it was supposed to be a giant cost savings. That cost savings at the Pentagon never appeared because the military officers who are going to be in charge of those boats constantly redesigned them. And so something that was 15 million to make became something that is more than 50 million to make, right? So there's an enormous problem at the Pentagon. I hope they make some progress against it. But fundamentally, you have to get rid of the defense procurement system, and you have to get rid of cost plus contracts and say, these are the specs. If you deliver it and everything works, we tested it, then we'll pay you. If not, you get nothing.
Yeah, but the problem we have, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you've said, but the likelihood of this of being successful has got to start with ending too big to fail if you're a defense contractor. It goes back to Lockheed, right?
Yes.
Under Nixon. Okay. If you're guaranteed that you'll get bailed out no matter how bad C5A overruns, this is just this is fantasy land. They've got to be able to say, even if you're a defense contractor, you go bankrupt if you don't produce. Right now, that's not there. So of course they just laugh at this idea that to change X, Y, Z. What's going to happen? And there's no oversight. There's no the debate. They just get more money without any scrutiny whatsoever. This is great. I would be love to see the military.
One very quick point. Several months before 9/11, I sat down with Donald Rumsfeld, who's just in his office as Secretary of Defense. And I asked him this question. I said, what is your number one goal? You returning as Secretary of Defense. It's unusual for someone to come back in this role. What is your number one goal? Why are you here? And he was very passionate about taking on the defense cartels and breaking them up and simplifying the procurement process and reinventing the military, right? And he was saying a lot of the same things we've just said. And then 9/11 happened, and it just was impossible for him. And when I saw him a year later, he was completely overwhelmed and frankly angry that he didn't get his chance to reinvent the Pentagon, right? Now they're trying it again, 24 years later, right? Whether they'll succeed, who knows? We could have a war in the Taiwan Strait or get pulled into some other action, and this could be delayed for another generation. But they're trying again. And Feinberg, made his money with Cerberus, turning around companies. Can he turn around defense under Hegseth's leadership? It's a big question. No guarantee of success, but it has to be tried.
It is, but all I'm saying, Richard, again, not disagreeing with any of your observations, it's got to start at the top. It's got to start with an executive order from Mr. Trump, and he has no difficulty saying, you're not going to be too big to fail defense contractors. We're not bailing you out. It is the policy of the United States of America to let defense contractors go bankrupt if they're inefficient and are not producing what we ask them to do. Until that happens, it's just a game.
Yes, yes. And Boeing should get the whack here, right?
Yeah.
You're going to say, look, you delivered defective things that are late, and they got to go, right? You have
the F-35 fighter. It's now lifetime contract. It's over $2 trillion. I mean, what? It's probably we'll be fighting cyber warfare, and it'll be obsolete before we've had a single strike with this plane. But anyway, I agree. That shows it's serious. I've been around here a long time, like you have, Richard. All these words, man. And the Congress is so anemic. They do no oversight whatsoever. All they do is they look, and I've told the people who sit on the defense committees, okay, how many jobs in my district? Okay, I don't care whether it's digging, like WPA, raking leaves. They don't care. So it's going to take a lot more than what we've seen so far. But I think we can agree that really is a huge problem we have right now because it's such an enormous part of the economy.
I have to make some comments on a bunch of this stuff. Okay. One is, Richard, if you go to calculate the inflation statistics, you'll also get the same bullshit from the inflation statistics.
Yes.
If inflation's probably 4 to 5% higher, okay? But nobody's concerned about that number. Okay. If you're concerned about the truth, you want the truth. Okay. If the government was concerned about the truth, they'd be shutting down every statistic area in the government. Okay. but they're not. Okay, so to sit and assert and say the only person in the government who can't calculate numbers correctly is the BLS in this person, and every other person is perfect in their calculations of their numbers. Okay, and to assert that if this person would have come out with a number that would have had 3 trillion jobs created, okay, nobody would have gone and asked her, where'd you come up with those numbers? Okay, so this is not pursuit of truth. This is not having a gold standard of numbers. So every number that people could really rely upon, and it's the truth. This is a guy with a bruised ego who had a bad number and called them up and said, I don't like this number. Find out what the hell happened, okay? If the inflation number came out to be 0 and it was really 10%, he wouldn't have sent somebody down and say, give me an explanation for this. So this is just bullshit, okay? Second, turnarounds, okay? I've bought companies out of bankruptcy, okay? I've taken more than 20 companies out of bankruptcy, okay? If you're going to succeed, you succeed in the first 2 or 3 months, okay? If you don't succeed early on, you're not going to succeed. And as Bruce said, what are the preconditions for me to ever go into a company, that I do a turnaround on, okay? I tell the people, you were the cause of the problem. Since you're the cause of the problem, let me make this clear to you. You are the cause, I'm the solution, okay? Get that clear, okay? Who is God now in this company? Me, okay? What's your role? Find a corner somewhere, crawl into the corner for shame and embarrassment, and don't ever show up, okay? The day you show up, I leave, okay? That's what I tell. I had one guy who one day, I was turning around this guy's company. I was in a big negotiation, and he said, Jeff, I want to learn something. Can I come into the room with you? I said, look, okay, you can come into the room, but the rule is very clear, okay? One is, once the other side sees you in the room, they're going to try and divide us, okay? Because I'm pretty tough as a negotiator, and they're going to try and make you feel I'm too tough and I'm going to blow the deal, and they're going to try and get you into the process, okay? So you gotta be smart and keep your mouth shut, okay? The minute you open up your mouth, I'm leaving, okay? So you keep your mouth shut, okay? So of course we go into the room, and the other guy was very theatrical, trying to make the principal in this, feel worried that I was blowing the deal, okay? So he opened his mouth. So I pointed at him and I said, come here. I gestured to him. He got up. We went to another small office, and I said to them, you decide who goes back into that room. It's not going to be both of us, you or me. You decide right now, okay? Right now, me or you goes back into the room. And he said, can it be both? I said, no, that's not a choice, you or me, right now. This is an existential question now. Okay, I'll leave. I'm sorry. Yes, I said, get the fuck out of here, okay? I don't want to see you, okay? So he left. I went back into the room, and the other guy laughed, and he said, I had to try it. And I laughed, and I said, yes, I can understand you had to try it, okay? But, he knew. Now the whole tone changed, because he was sure that I had that guy's support, that at the end, he wanted to be involved in the process, but at the end, he accepted not going back into that room. So what did the other guy know? He says now he knows I'm God here, okay? He knows I'm the one that calls the shots, okay? If you're not in that position, you're not going to succeed, okay? If you have somebody out there undercutting you, I want to bomb here, I want to bomb there, I want to send nuclear subs to Russia and maybe see if I can start a nuclear war there, okay? Now maybe I'll do war games and send more things over to China to see if I can get China over there, and maybe I'll attack China one day because I don't like Mr. Xi, and he won't let me buy TikTok, so I'm going to nuke China because he won't let me buy TikTok, so if you're going to succeed in a restructuring, you have success quickly. If you're not going to have success, so I'm surprised if this guy who's been a real restructuring guy, he should know better. He should know if you don't have quick success, you're not going to have success. Restructurings don't take long periods of time. You either move everything in the right direction quickly, or you don't.
If you have
Okay?
2.46 million people
sit
you
down with
cannot
everyone.
fire, you cannot do restructurings quickly.
The restructurings are not just about firing people.
Eat.
Restructurings are not just about firing people.
Well, it's a big part of it.
No, listen, it goes back.
Richard,
it goes back to the
Richard, I've restructured over 20 companies. Every company I went into, I took companies out of bankruptcy and made a lot of money in because I was successful. Okay, so I know this business. Okay, you go in with a plan, and you have to have a 90-day plan. You have to have a 30-day plan, a 60-day plan, a 90-day plan. Okay, and if you miss that plan, okay, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. Okay, and it doesn't mean you fire everyone. Okay, but it means you have significant advance, on that plan. Okay, you have to show material results. If you don't show material results, nobody will believe you anymore. Okay, you have to say, these are the material accomplishments I'll have in a certain period of time. It doesn't mean you're going to solve the whole problem. It means you'll have a material. It means that everyone looking at it says, I can see that this is a material advance and that we're moving in the right direction, and there's tangible evidence that's material in nature, not trivial in nature, material in nature, okay, that this is working. So that's
the problem we have in defense. I go back to my point is the incentives have to change.
Exactly.
Right now, and they haven't changed. That's why you have to say you're going to go bankrupt. We're not bailing you out anymore. Right now, there's no incentive. Cost plus, you just spend whatever you want. There's no punishment. There's no deterrence against being completely lax and idle and spending anything you want. And that can only come from the top. When Jeffrey took over, he was the top. Mr. Trump needs to make that clear. All these defense contractors, we're going to let you go bankrupt if you have these cost overruns, the ones that Proxmire used to disclose. Until that happens, defense contractors would simply wait these guys out, and excess will go, and the same thing will persisted in our entire lifetimes. You have
to have, and Bruce is 100% right. You have to have Trump has got to tell this guy, whatever his name is, okay, that whatever you say, I'm backing up. Okay, that's what he's got to say, and then he's got to sit back and tell the contractors, gravy train is over now. No,
I might have.
Okay? That's all. You don't need to fire many people. You just say the game is over now. That's the only conversation you need to have. That's what I would be doing. I'd go into all these people and say, the game is over. Okay, you deal with me. I'm God now. You're never going to get another contract like this again in your life. Okay. And if you argue with me, you won't get any more contracts at all with the Defense Department. Okay, you will never ever do business. Anybody any relative of yours will never get business with me again. Okay, so it's not a simple thing.
Jeff, don't you think that's exactly what's going on right now? Exactly what you just said.
Richard, what's going on is one conversation. When I've done every restructuring, I've never needed any more than one conversation with any party. Okay, I've been involved with parties where one company was a dominant supplier, and in one conversation, I had a deal. Okay, I had one company. I had this foundry in Mexico, and the foundry was being run by somebody. I told them, these are the new rules. They said to me, no, they aren't. Okay. So I flew to Chicago to meet the company. And I said, you don't like the rules. You won't play by the rules I tell you to play by. They said, yes, I think we have a contract here that you can't do this. I said, well, you think it, maybe it's true. Maybe it's not true. Okay. But I'm telling you this, call your staff right now and find out what the circumstances are. Okay. So they called the staff. I locked them out. They could not get into the facility. Okay. So I said, fine. Okay. You do what you need to do, but they no longer have access. Okay. And for me, I don't acknowledge that we have a contract anymore. Okay. Oh, we're going to sue you. Okay. But do what you need to do. Okay. But you don't have access anymore. I'm not doing business with you anymore. I told you what I needed out of you to preserve the relationship. You didn't do it. This is not long drawn out negotiations. Okay. If you're earning If you're in a long, drawn-out negotiation, you're an amateur, okay? Because as long as you keep talking, they know that they continue to buy time. There's got to be a cost of extending time, okay? Because while you're giving them time, they're ripping you off. So the longer you talk, the more they're ripping you off. You got to truncate that and say, you ran out of time. You're not ripping me off anymore. I told these people, you ran out of time. You're not ripping them off. You're not ripping me off anymore. Okay. You think you have a legal claim? I don't think so. But do what you think you need to do. And I'm going to do what I need to do. Do what you think is in your best interest. I'm going to do what's in my best interest. And we'll see who ends up where we end up. You know what the guy did? He threw his coffee on me. Okay. So you know why he did it? Because he was impotent and he knew game over. Okay. If he was in a great position, he would have laughed. He would have gone out. He would have been happy suing me. Okay. But instead, the only thing he was able to do was throw coffee on me. Okay. There was no lawsuit because people never came back. The contracts were nullified. Okay. And that foundry that had been losing money because they were ripping off the foundry, in 2-3 months, I had profitable. Okay. Just getting rid of them. Okay. No drawn out conversations. Okay. Every day I would have a conversation with them. The foundry, they're stealing from me. Okay. How many days am I going to use words and let people steal from me? So anyone who's not an amateur understands this. So if you think this guy is not if he's behaving differently than I'm saying, he's an amateur, and Trump just put the wrong guy in, and if he's a professional, he'd be doing exactly what I would say, what I would do. Okay.
I think my analogy is like, you're not going to reform the post office and make it compete with FedEx, with the system as it is, with the incentive structure it is. You have, if you're going to privatize, you have to put in entrepreneurial incentives. I don't care who you hire there. The post office is not going to work right because you're dealing with human nature. There's no reward like you get at FedEx. You don't get bonuses by actually paying attention to your customers and being alert and asking them if they can be helped. So it's not, no matter what they do, it's not going to work. Because the incentives are all ass backwards.
That's
right. The only way that you say, and this goes back when I first came to Washington 50 years ago, bailed out Lockheed Aircraft, the L-1011. Hey, we can't let it go under. So there's no incentive to do anything other than just spend, because they know the government will bail them out because we can't let a defense contractor go under. Boeing knows that as well, and all that. And now you got Northrop Grumman and all these other companies, General Dynamics. They know. And so they just spend, and until the president of the United States makes it clear the rules have changed, it all is hot air.
But I don't
we know that knows how to do it.
I may have missed the beginning part of the conversation and just want to say hello and climate change strikes again. But I'm still trying to catch up on what you guys are talking about. But my first thought on what you're saying is that
good luck, Ryan.
I don't think Trump wants anything different personally, based on his background connections, and maybe that's kind of what you're getting at. And the sense I'm getting is that the process toward that's getting undercut by too many voices in the midst. And I think that Donald Trump, and rather the kind of above the unelected power structure around him, doesn't want the gravy train to stop. And I think that's the real point. But maybe I'm missing more of the conversation. So please continue.
Ryan, why do you think
Bruce is right. All you need to do, USPS, you say, there's $500,000 in the bank. Okay. Once that money runs out, no more money. Okay. Figure this out. Okay. And then they'll have the incentive to solve the problem, because if they don't have to solve the problem, they're all out of a job. Okay. Yeah. It's just that simple.
Well, Ryan, why do you think Trump doesn't want to change anything? I mean, I've seen 6 months of incredible changes.
Well, okay. If we're going to get into the genuine nature of whether things are actually changing, that's a different conversation. But in regard to, you're talking, if I'm understanding, again, I'm coming in halfway through a conversation. So if you're talking about the idea of changing away from the, merchant of death kind of, the idea that this is all, they're profiting from the continual sales of war. There's no detriment to doing, this is what we're talking about. And the idea being that not the government itself, I think, is completely entrenched with exactly that, from the revolving door structure of our government and many other things, but also just the people that profit that are in his inner circle, or any person in that position. I think there's too much benefit going on from the continuation of status quo for them to ever really want that to change. But there's an interest in feigning that change, in showing some process that doesn't really change because the other side wouldn't let me, or whatever the narrative is. That's how I read the situation. But correct me if I'm, missing.
But I agree. And it's not a Trump. This is not a Trump problem.
I agree.
This goes
I agree.
back at least Eisenhower, the Miller.
Right.
It's not a Trump problem.
It's a
the
government problem.
institutional
Right.
pathology out there, and it keeps getting worse every single year.
Right.
And until we actually need an Eisenhower who has the credibility, no one's going to accuse him as code pink, and says, listen, and he knew all the crap that he was getting from his Defense Department, and could actually cut the budget, not be accused of being a sellout. And you need somebody like that to come in and say, all right, we're not going to have too big to fail. You can go bankrupt. We don't need half this stuff. It's garbage. And he's untouchable because he's Eisenhower was there on D-Day. That's what we need in order to break the back of this mammoth, bloated
except
creature.
Eisenhower couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Defense contractor spending went up every year of the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower vetoed the largest tax cuts at the time, which ultimately Kennedy, when he was president, signed very similar tax cuts. But and he didn't cut. There was a lot of pressure in his party, pushed by Senator Taft of Ohio, to cut spending, and he didn't.
So but I'm not saying that he did. Richard,
so he had no success.
You need
he had a
somebody
speech at the end, which were just words. He accomplished nothing. The defense contractors became more entrenched in the Eisenhower years. So even Eisenhower couldn't do it. That should give you an idea of how hard the problem is to fix.
Yes, I agree with everything.
How unwilling they are to fix it.
Yeah.
I completely disagree with that. The problems are easy to fix. The thing is there's lack of conviction to fix it. That's the problem. It's not like this is rocket science. It's not like you need a genius to fix the problem.
Well, I wouldn't say there's small problems either.
Problem
I
is,
agree with you, Jeffrey.
problem is not the courage.
Yeah, you're not considering constraints.
There's just not the courage and conviction to do it. It's not the complexity of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't. Okay? It isn't the complexity. Okay?
You're right about that. Look, it's an HR problem.
It's the lack of courage and conviction to do it. Okay? It's a president who sits back and says, I can spend $5 trillion extra in increasing the debt ceiling. Okay? And by the way, I'm going to do nothing about what, and I'm going to be a spectator while Social Security and Medicare go bankrupt, in 2033, 2034. I'm going to be a spectator to that, all that stuff. Okay. Again, this is just a matter of will, courage, and conviction. It's not complexity. Okay. What makes it hard to solve is not that the solution is difficult, is that nobody is willing to implement the solution that's necessary. That's the problem. Not the complexity of the problem. These are not complex problems. Okay, they aren't. They're easy to solve.
Yeah, John Quincy Adams had the resolution in 1821, his July 4th address. Invincible self-defense. We don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We have no existential threats. We defend ourselves, pulverize anybody who attacks us, but otherwise, all we are is invincible self-defense. We're not going to destroy our own domestic prosperity by trying to rule the world. That's it. We just need to get out of this absurd idea that we need, we've got now 32 members of NATO. We're defending North Macedonia. We're defending Montenegro. And we're worried about the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu and the Fiji because China's building a road there. This is insane. We are the safest country in the history of the world. Sure, there are going to be some threats because we live. Human beings, we're going to have some risk. We're staggeringly wasting. It's not only the actual expenditures, the intellectual genius of the country is becoming more proficient in killing people rather than developing new mousetraps like Thomas Edison. That's where our genius is going. This is crazy. We're impoverishing ourselves the same way the Roman Empire found something to be worried about every day of the year, constantly in warfare, no matter how diminished the risk was, until they went bankrupt. That's where we're going right now, for the nonsensical reason that we need to be concerned about China believing the South China Sea ought to be its sphere of influence. Yeah, what else is new? We've had our sphere of influence, the Monroe Doctrine, for 2 centuries. This is nuts.
Yeah, back then we had wise people who didn't want to waste taxpayer money. Okay. Who had a strategic vision, okay? And they had a budget that reflected that strategic vision. Like, and that strategic vision was exactly that. We're going to trade, we're going to engage in commerce, We're not going to seek monsters aboard. We don't want to get involved. That began with the decisions Washington made when he was petitioned by certain people to support, like Jefferson, to support the French in their battles with England, and with other people that said we should support England. And when Washington said, I'm not supporting France and I'm not supporting England, I'm staying neutral. So, so we tried to preserve that sense, of neutrality, except for examples of when people were actually using mischief in our own continent. Okay.
But it was more than that, Jeffrey. Congress enacted the Neutrality Act of Congress actually had the role. It wasn't just giving it to Washington. Congress enacted the Neutrality Act of 1794 to keep us out of these stupid wars. So it wasn't just one person. The institutions were working. They don't work anymore. Well, Congress is anemic.
If we're going to reduce the defense budget, we have to have a strategic plan of what is our strategic vision of what kind of national defense do we need. I don't see a conversation on that. All Palantir is doing is enhancing government surveillance. Okay. That's all doing. It's building AI models so the government has more information so that they completely eradicate any sense of privacy that we have.
Well, Palantir is doing a hell of a lot more than that, but I agree in the sense of the world seeing it. I just want to point that really quickly. Just Palantir is doing a ton more than, but in the sense of what we're being shown, that's the effect of. They're not helping us any other way as in American sense. They're surveilling Americans, but there's a whole nother layer to the, what's going around the world in regard to the technological direction. If you guys want to talk about that, but back to your point, Jeffrey.
Let me ask Bruce a quick question. So, as you know, we had this base alignment commission that was pushed by a former senator of Texas, and it closed a lot of domestic military bases.
Right.
Is it time for an international base closing commission where we take a look at all of these bases we have? We have bases in more than 90 countries.
800 total, yeah.
Yeah. So, right. But we have like a submarine base in Denmark that we haven't used for decades. Like, why are we still paying a lease on that? But there are other things, like maybe it's not as geopolitically smart to be in certain places, right? Why don't we take a serious look at that and close some of these U.S. military bases overseas that are just exposing our people to danger and running up costs? So my question to you is it time we had a commission?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Congress could do that. Yeah, I've been screaming about this for 25 years. 800 military bases abroad. What the hell are they doing? We wake up and we find soldiers died in Niger and in Mali. What the heck are they doing there? We got a national security interest. It's completely crazy. And there has to be congressional oversight. There hasn't been a serious congressional oversight hearing of the Defense Department until William Proxmire, like 40 years ago.
Right.
They automatically approve anything. Voice vote. That's it. Open, shut. This is ridiculous. And that is what we need. But it can only happen if Congress decides it wants to be a player. Right now, it's eager to give everything to the executive branch and say, your problem, not mine. If it goes south, I'll blame you. You got to have Congress have some institutional pride. It's their money, I don't know how you do this, but none of them have any backbone anymore. We need William Proxmire to be resurrected.
It's the same cycle of conversation, though, and this is important to have. We talk about this often, but it's like there's this same cycle where we turn back and saying, well, Congress has to get up and do something. Like I agree completely that it has to be a debate, it has to be a conversation, but it's frustrating that we can mire ourselves in these, like you're saying, Richard, of course that needs to happen. But yet having them debate the process, they'll go on for 15 years. It's like, we just need to stop this because like you're saying, it's not about empire. It's about, domestic. It's about being able to defend ourselves and looking inward. And I think the problem is that nobody in Congress, nobody in the executive branch, most people connected to them have no interest in stopping any of that. So that's the real point of change. Like, because if Congress has no benefit in doing so, they're going to debate this forever, like we said. So how do we motivate them to want that change? That's a different conversation, but that's
that's the motivating the citizens. That's what I say. The citizens got to write in and say, listen, you're gonna lose your job. You're gonna do X, Y, Z. And one way is you can change the grammar, and at least Eisenhower did, I think, in one of his early speeches in 1953 says, each time you're wasting money on an F-35, that's 5 hospitals and 7 great schools and fewer bridges and all that stuff that we can't spend because you're wasting it, on giving money to these defense contractors, to learn how to kill a species with greater proficiency that we don't need anymore. But the citizens have to get engaged and involved. Congress is never going to change unless they fear for their jobs. Simple as that. They are professional politicians. If they fear they're going to lose their jobs, they change. Until that happens, they're going to change.
And there's only one way of accomplishing that, okay? The only way of accomplishing that is government only spends the money we're willing to pay for, not borrow from, but pay for, okay? Then we'll find out a lot of what government does, people are not willing to pay for, okay? If the government stopped issuing debt and said, all this money we're spending, we're now going to raise revenues, by $6 trillion this year, whatever the amount is that, Trump wanted to increase, or they did increase they asked for the increase in the debt ceiling. We're not going to increase the debt ceiling. We're going to raise revenues. Okay. Then people would have said, oh, wait a second here. Okay. Because then they would have realized that there's not enough money from the rich to pay for all of this, and that everybody else would be paying significantly material higher taxes. Okay. I calculated for every person right now, just the amount of money being spent for, terrorizing undocumented people and exporting them and building this infrastructure of a paramilitary force on our homeland, okay, and then sending people, throughout the world and sending them and then bringing them back and fighting litigation and then paying fines and penalties and stuff like that. That basically is about $1,500 a taxpayer, okay? So just for that, that's why, one thing is to sit back and say, do you like these deportations? Okay. Do you like mass deportations? Yeah, I love it. I love it. Great. By the way, send in $1,500. Okay. And we'll continue mass deportations. How many people you think are going to send in a $1,500 check to do these mass deportations? Because they think it's for free. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a free lunch. They think it's for free. It's always about incentives. You change the incentives, you change the behavior. People think all this stuff is for free because they're not paying for it. Okay.
Speaking only of legal immigration, do you think that in addition to the physical test, do you have communicable diseases, there should also be an IQ test where you have to be at the national average or above in order to be admitted as a legal immigrant? Do you think IQ tests for immigrants?
I do, and I think that they ought to have that for citizens for graduating from high school and college. They ought to have the same standards domestically for graduations as we put on the alien. And I would say yes, let's have a higher standard. Give them the incentive. That's what makes the country great. We care about merit, and you don't deviate just because you're born here. Merit is the touchstone wherever you were born. You satisfy the merit, you come in. We don't want you. You can go to the Mars. That's where we have to get back to.
But
so
the
we
only
have real standards. But
why do you want to? So what about the people? We're having a whole bunch of people at farms that say 30% of their workforce that they can't replace because Americans don't want to do the job. So what do you want to do? You want to cut back our agricultural product?
No. First of all, if we look at the unions that for Cesar Chavez, when he ran his commercial farm workers union, he had 600,000 members. Today in the state of California, there are less than 3,000 members of that union. A lot of these things have been automated away. I was on a farm a few years ago with one of the largest walnut farms in California. And they now have robots picking walnuts that are better than humans at it. They can tell if there's a fungus on the thing, and therefore it'll contaminate the batch, the walnut's not ready to drop, and so on. These things have been quite sophisticated. And then for a lot of agricultural labor.
So you think a lot of these farmers are stupid and they don't know that they could replace all these workers with technology?
No, they in fact, in reality, have been replacing workers.
A whole lot of conversation
farm workers. Hang on, let me just make this point here.
I was talking to Jeffrey. Go ahead.
The number of farm workers has been dropping for 30 years, right? It's as they automate and simplify procedures and processes. So I don't think the farmers are stupid. They run a very competitive, low margin business, and they have to look at costs and real world results. But the days of having to immigrate, bring in large numbers of people for farm labor are disappearing. They're not gone yet, but they are definitely disappearing, and those jobs will disappear with them. We've seen, if you zoom out more, the number of in 1900, roughly a third of the U.S. economy was farm labor. Right today, it's less than 2%, and that's going to continue to drop. All these Trump fantasies about saving manufacturing. Manufacturing has been losing as a share of the U.S. workforce since the early 1950s, right? So these are large secular declines. So the immigration that we're going to need moving forward is at the current level of IQ or higher, people who are analytical, who are able to process, who are able to work in science-driven fields. By the way, that's also true in the U.S. military. So the average recruit who's accepted has been going up in IQ. The U.S. Army actually sets a floor at 83 for IQ, but essentially no one is let into the U.S. Army below 99 IQ anymore, right? Because these are more advanced jobs requiring more analytical skills. And by the way, if you ban lower IQ people, those are people disproportionately who get involved in industrial accidents and in criminal activity. Those things, people have studied IQ for over 100 years. There's a definite correlation between these things.
That makes sense.
You'll also be eliminating social problems by screening for IQ.
But I want to add really quickly one point is that it's important. I agree with the logic. Meritocracy is pretty much the only logical direction for all the nonsense today. But the problem, though, is that, especially when you're overlapping that with the military side of it, is that there's a whole nother, there's, people that are seeking amnesties, people that are, like the point is when we have an empire that is driving chaos and people then come fleeing away from that, there's an obligation, I argue, to show some kind of, something, that can be discussed. But right now it is that we show them amnesty. We say, you can come and, take refuge here. Now, there's a problem there if you're then going, but only if you're this level of intelligence, when that's something our government is creating, like just taking South America in general. It's important to point that out. But I agree. The logic, I think, is there.
No, I agree. But because like the Afghans, we promised them, hey, if you help us with the stupid war over fighting against the Taliban, and then we change their mind and say, sorry, tough.
Right.
But that's just
hold on. The Afghan interpreters.
I vehemently disagree. Okay. I vehemently disagree.
But let me just finish
Go ahead,
by putting, and then Jeffrey take over. My view is government, get out of this. Go back to Adam Smith.
Yes.
An even-handed administration of justice, peace, tolerability, and easy taxes, and let the market decide. And the government, we always know the government has ulterior motives. It never has the motive is just the public interest. The public interest is the collective decisions of private individuals trying to search out what that's going to be profitable for them. So the government should even be in this business whatsoever. The private marketplace will sort this out. Just give it time.
Well, Bruce,
it's not going to be infallible. Give it time.
Think about that a minute. So what no one's talking about is how tariffs and immigration are related. So if goods can't move freely, people do, right? So if you want to reduce immigration, you need actually freer trade so that those people in their homelands can have, good paying jobs
to sell in the United States. Yeah.
Sell goods and services into the United States, right? And certainly for the Caribbean immigration, the educational systems are good enough on most Caribbean islands where a lot of back office work could be shipped there, and they would be electronic immigrants, right? They would do low-end data processing and things like that in St. Lucia, for example, right? And but you have to have goods move freely if you want to limit immigration. If you do limit immigration and you don't allow goods to move freely, then you're going to see an increase in prices. The other thing that no one's looking at is this whole phony debate about who pays for the tariffs. The answer is everybody pays. And here's why. Because tariffs set a price floor and deter innovation in the domestic market. So what happens over time is they know that their competitors from overseas face a 15 or 20% price disadvantage. So it reduces the incentive for domestic producers to innovate and to make serious price cuts or value increases because they don't have to. And so over time, you end up with a Japanese situation where the Japanese were incredible drivers of innovation in the 50s and 60s. that by the 70s that was starting to slow. By the 80s, it was slowing more. And by the 90s, they were in a slump, right? Because they had protected their domestic market to such a degree that the internal competition wasn't enough to drive innovation and value creation and price cuts. And so the long-term effect of this, and look, the Trump folks and Trump himself knows this. So I would assume that in year 3 of the Trump administration, these tariffs would actually be reduced.
If the intention is what you believe the outcome is, which I don't think that's the case.
Richard, let me just comment and then take over. But Richard, these are not driven. These are not economic deals. When he slaps the 50% surcharge on Brazil over Bolsonaro, that's not an economic decision. He just gets some kind of adrenaline by walking around and trying to rule the whole world. You know, and he at the same time he says we shouldn't be interfering in the domestic affairs of foreign countries. He turns around and does it himself. He tells the Israelis, you know, you should be celebrating building monuments to Netanyahu, stop the prosecutions. What the hell are we telling the Israelis and the Brazilians how to run their law enforcement program? It is absurd. And that goes back to the fact that when you get the government involved in any economy, it will be driven by ulterior partisan motives having nothing to do with economic efficiencies, which ought to be the touchstone of our policy.
Yeah, but it does affect us, right? So if Brazil has a bad legal system, you're going to drive more Brazilian immigration to the United States as people flee a bad system.
Oh, so you think this is going to change their legal system?
But I do not believe that Trump's intervening.
You think this is going to change it for the better or for the worse their legal system?
I agree with you. That's why the World Bank has a judicial rating system when they try to have a risk factor, and I agree with that. But I do not believe Donald Trump is trying to improve.
Look, tariffs are a very blunt instrument, and have they been used wisely in all cases? I think no one would say the answer is yes.
Well, what case have they been used well?
Yeah,
the EU trade deal is all right. Look at this. All right. So the two largest economic blocs in the world are the United States and the EU, right? Together, they account for roughly 80% of the world's GDP. We, under the deal, 0 tariffs for U.S. goods going into Europe, a 15% tariff on European goods coming into the U.S. All right, it's not a 0 for 0 deal, which the libertarian in me would love, but it's pretty good. And if you look at
the Europeans had talked about doing a 0 for 0 deal. Explain to me why I'm better off on having a higher cost of goods and what you just said, less innovation than a deal that would have just been eliminated all restrictions. Tell me why I'm better off.
0 for 0 deal would have been amazing. Except
that's what the Europeans offered.
Wait, hold on, that's not what they offered. They offered 0 for 0 on industrial and manufactured goods only, not on energy, not on financial services, and not on food. Those are the 3 things America sells to them. So that's why the deal was unacceptable, right? The bulk of what we sell is one of those 3 categories, right? You add defense on top of that, right? And that's virtually all of what we sell to Europe, right? So that wasn't a real offer.
But Richard, let me interject. Why wouldn't, if it's 0-0, maybe we would develop without confronting any tariff barriers in Europe? Maybe we would be able to change our comparative advantage and take advantage of the 0 tariffs, because
also non-tariff barriers are a thing. Okay. And so the Europeans have been using phytosanitary standards, anti-GMO laws, and so on to keep our food products out, right? If you let American food products into Europe and you get rid of all the non-tariff barriers, which, by the way, this deal does, you will lower the price of food across the European Union by more than 15%. So the domestic manufacturers in Europe know that they are not price competitive on food, and they are not wanting to restructure.
Yeah, and they also don't have the same obesity problem that the U.S. has. We don't really know that if they change their diets to eat like Americans, whether they'll end up spending less on food and a lot more on healthcare. We don't know the answer to that.
The second largest.
It's kind of funny because that's the argument Bobby Kennedy, the head of Health and Human Services, would make, is the fact is that part of the reason we spend so much on healthcare is the type of foods we eat and all the chemicals we put in it. And that's a big reason why we spend so much on healthcare.
Yeah, but Jeff, data matters.
maybe
just-
the Europeans want to keep their country, the people healthier, and they don't want to have the same obesity and healthcare problems that the U.S. has. So yes, maybe they're willing to spend more on food to spend less on healthcare.
All right. On a per capita basis, France is the second largest consumer of Big Macs and the second largest consumer of high blood pressure drugs, right? Second only to the US. So it's that, if you get outside of Paris, it looks a lot like the United States. There's a lot of.
Yeah, but it could be significantly worse. It could be significantly worse.
Look, I'm not a fan of American processed food. Okay. But I'm telling you that Europe is not some magical place full of thin people eating fresh food all the time. Right?
The obesity problem in the U.S. is greater than almost every country in the world. Okay?
Well, we should add that it's not just obesity, though, guys. Remember, that's why the GMO thing is an issue. There's a lot more going on than just being overweight, and a lot of people in the world are starting to recognize a lot of what the U.S. systems in general allow for people to eat and consume are regulated or banned a lot of other places in the world. So obesity is a huge part of it, but it's things like the, endocrine disrupting chemicals and different things that are, that nobody really gets to talk about. So, but
the food we're selling to Europe is mostly grain, corn, and so on. We're not talking about selling processed
that's chief
food.
among the problem, though. You see, these are the GMO issues.
The problem in processed food.
No.
If you're turning wheat into bread, right? It's the wheat itself is fine. Right?
No, it's not, though. You see, that's not correct. We can get into the reality of our genetically modified products that we sell down to the actual wheat itself, down to the corn, down to the soy. But we don't have to dive through all of that. The reality is those are not healthy the way we produce them in this country. But it's the reason, with Jeffrey's point, of why there might be more pushback is just that it could be that there's other aspects that they're trying to push away from.
No, they're trying to protect.
You're making a good point, though, Richard.
An inefficient industry in Europe. They're trying to protect the common agricultural policy, which is a socialist farm scheme. And so GMO is an excuse used to protect inefficient industries and outmoded political.
That's a very one-sided view. There's a lot of different perspectives on that.
No, I understand, but
Richard,
listen.
They're not mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive. They can want to protect their farmer and still also want to protect health as well. And they not be, it's one or the other. It could be both. They want to protect their farmer, and they also they don't want to have the same type of health problems Americans have. It could be both.
I love buying organic food in France. Those products on the
what I think the discussion
I can tell you every time I travel to Europe and eat at Europe, okay, so to be there, I always comment, I see why one of the pleasures of going to Europe is eating fresh food, is eating food that's not processed. I noticed the difference, and I don't have a very refined palate, so it's not as if I'm like a chef that can really, but I really can tell the difference. When I was like, gee, these eggs are amazing. Gee, these vegetables are amazing. The fish is amazing. Why is it amazing? Because it's not all processed. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. 100% agree with you on that.
That's part of the appeal. It's not all processed. So it could be both. We don't protect our farmers.
Well, under the European trade deal, their agricultural goods come in at zero.
What all this shows to me, it goes back. The government always has ulterior motives.
Yes.
They never have a higher standard. Maybe they'll latch on something. They may do the right thing for the wrong reason. They'll never do it for the right reason. The reason why they're in government is because they're sociopaths who crave power for the sake of power. That's why they're there.
Right.
And you can read the biographies of every leader in the last 50 years. It's all the same. Now, that doesn't mean that having government desist means it's perfect. It means it's better than all the alternatives, because the government's always going to make it worse. It is always going to be a cure worse than the disease, because it always has ulterior partisan motives about power and trying to control our lives. That's why my view is government, stay away.
Yes.
It's not going to be perfect by any means, because mankind's made of crooked timber, but it's going to be better than getting the government involved, because then we have all these arguments, and you can come up with all sorts of schemes to justify what. Ultimately, the scheme is, I want to stay in power, so I'll decide X and call Y or whatever. But that's not the real reason. Right? I've read 5,000 biographies. I know the political mind. I deal with it all the time. It has nothing to do with the public good. It's always what's in it for me politically. And we got to get out of that business.
Yeah. I struggle with Bruce. We because they want to be intrusive with their people doesn't mean we have to be as stupid as they are. Well,
correct.
I don't. Why should we copy stupid models? Okay, we got to do what's we got to do.
Privatize a lot of government functions.
Privatize. We should get rid of government. Okay,
yes. Privatize is the wrong direction.
Government, not privatize function. Get rid of government. What does government on a consistent basis do better than markets? Nothing. Okay, nothing.
No,
So,
Jeffrey,
well, actually, Jeff, it does one important thing, which nothing else can do but government. And that is to say the people who are status seeking of the political mind, as Bruce calls it, right? We have to keep them busy or they will be extremely destructive in the economy. So to the extent we can have things that they do that are less dangerous, right?
Give me an example. I need an example.
Okay, so say you're in an HOA, right? You have a neighbor who, the kids would call a Karen. It's really good to get her elected and put her on the board of the HOA because she will be kept busy there and cause less problems for people in the neighborhood, right? So sometimes these leadership roles are very if
But there's a difference. If I go into a neighborhood with conflicting neighbors, I can choose a different neighborhood. I can't choose a different government. Okay. If someone's a pain in the ass and the response to a pain in the ass is to give them a position in government and think there'll be a less pain in the ass
exactly
because they get a position in the government.
No. Well, the Germans have an expression.
The criteria for having somebody in the government.
The Germans have an expression called praise them off to Brussels, which is how they remove people from their civil service who are extremely destructive, and they send them to Brussels where they can work in the EU, right?
Yeah, but listen, we have the answer, I think, Jeffrey, that you neglect here is the option, which is separation of powers. You pit ambition against ambition. So the government can't do anything unless they get a super consensus. Like it's almost 100%. Everybody agrees from different factions. That is what Madison was talking about.
Yeah,
separation
right now, the problem with the ambition of the courts right now and the Congress is their role is to feed Trump's ambition. It's not ambition against ambition. We have the whole government feeding his ambition. Okay?
No, I understand, but I'm saying that is where where it's an improvement on the private marketplace, because you try to have a neutral forums where you can have somebody without a vested interest being a judge in his own case. So you provide greater confidence in business community. We'll do contracts as we can get them enforced. And most of the time you don't need to enforce them if you know you have a neutral platform in which you can get decision makers to adjudicate these kinds of disputes. But you need separation of powers. We haven't had separation of powers in 50 years till Truman said, hey, we got a police action in Korea. I don't need to get any authorization from Congress. Do what I want. He was saying at that time, not only could he seize the steel mills, which he got rebuked on, he said at the time, I can seize newspapers too, if I want to. Yes, if I think they're going to criticize me. And that's where we have to restore. And that's why it's so deplorable that Congress and now the courts seem to just surrendering your instruments of separation of powers. The reason why it works isn't because politicians don't become sociopaths. It is because when you pit these different forces of power against each other, it means you can't do anything unless you get a huge consensus where everybody says it's important to do this. Provide some armed forces to protect ourselves against invasion, have a neutral administration of justice, but that's it. Other than that, the government shouldn't do anything. And it's good. Gridlock is the greatest complement of separation of powers ever. What's wrong with gridlock? 100%. We should be jumping. It's an occasion for handstands when we do gridlock. Great. Go back and get a better idea so you get a higher consensus. This is how we grew from little tiny acorn into a huge oak for 100 years. We had real separation. We didn't have the government do hardly anything. And then we decide we want to be an empire and go to the Philippines, and it's all been downhill.
And Bruce, as you pointed out many times in the past, not just that, but also as the founders outlined as well, that it will inevitably lead to despotism, and we have to be on guard to that all the time, right? And that's not just accept that we got there and sit back and let them continue to grow power, but keep fighting all the way along. And I think that's the problem right now, is that a lot of people have kind of fallen into these positions as they think they can just put their lot in with a certain side and expect them to carry it through. And it's just, we've kind of lost touch with what we really need there, you know?
No, it goes back to Franklin, you know, a republic, if you can keep it. They weren't dumb. Yeah, they knew it took active citizen. If you can keep it, it's not going to keep unless you actually oversee and kick these people out of office. If they're going ahead and putting their private ambitions above the public good and private enterprise. It's as simple as that. Are we getting, you know, instructions, you know, in school? Are they saying, hey, you're a citizen, you're a future citizen. This is your obligation as a citizen. You got to do X, Y, Z. It's not even part of the discourse anymore. It's ridiculous how far we've come from what our initial expectations would be for being a citizen. You have voting rights, but you have an obligation to be vigilant over those who are ruling you.
And this is why I understand the logic of going the private, like public-private partnership kind of direction, like you said, Richard. But the problem for me is that now seems like the most dangerous time to do that. I understand why that would make sense in the moment, but I mean, the problem is that you then drift further away from accountability at a time when it seems most important, right? You open this door to, you know, like FOIAs don't apply because that's the private side of the partnership. Like the World Economic Forum really showed that pretty strongly, and I think that's becoming more and more clear with things like Palantir. But I think that we need to go the other direction personally, like, you know, less government, less influence outside of the specifics that we allot to it. But I just personally think that's near impossible right now with where we are, even with the
FOIAs should be automated so that we don't, and there are certain things in FOIA requests, and Bruce knows this subject very well. I've seen his work on the subject, that where you're asking for, like, give me the official calendar of, person X. That should be done through an automated process, and you should have that within 30 seconds of requesting, right?
I agree. Yeah.
There are other parts of FOIA where it should be very simple to have an automated compliance tool where 24/7 you can get certain types of information. For example, who attended the meeting, right? The classic one, which only people who understand FOIA do this, is give me the results of all previous FOIA requests from people who asked for this, right? So you look at everyone who you requested the material and you say, what did you give them? Give that to me. But if FOIA, the fruits of FOIA were also made public automatically through a software-based system, I mean, this is what DOJ should be working on. We should restructure FOIA.
These are all minor things, okay? The government, Thomas Jefferson thought government was too big, spending 3% of GDP, okay? We're now spending 25% of GDP on the federal government, and as a country, we're spending about 40% of GDP. Yes. And we regulate the rest, okay? Before, the government spent 3% and regulated nothing, okay? Now we spend now we directly control half the economy, and we indirectly control 98% of the economy.
Oh no, it's terrible. I totally agree.
So put a little FOIA and stuff like that, okay? This is nonsense. Okay?
The way you kill the
government should go out and giving people more information is not going to have them want to cut spending. Okay, doing more disclosures that 1% of the population will read, if 1% of the population will even read it. Okay?
Well, but to his point, though, if it was that accessible, and again, there's ways they would manipulate that, and we can deal with that. The point, though, is I agree with that. Though, if it was flooding and constant and anybody could access it, I would agree that would probably cause some more attention and more. There'd be ways to suppress that too. But
you're overlooking a huge problem.
They'll just classify more, and you won't be able to get anything because they'll just classify more.
Congress is derelict. FOIA is not a substitute for congressional oversight, subpoenas, disclosures, the Church Committee disclosing all the illegalities and craziness of the intelligence committees. They don't exist anymore. Where are the Proxmire hearings? That's where you could have disclosure. The drug issues, Kefauver, they don't even operate anymore. They come in Tuesday night, they leave Thursday afternoon, that's the beginning and end, they go on recess. That was supposed to be, and Woodrow Wilson writes about this in Congressional Government. He says the informing function of Congress is more important than its legislative function.
Yes.
Yes, sunshine is the best disinfectant. It's shut down now. You don't have any hearings anymore. They're ridiculous. And this is an institution that has inherent contempt power. It can immediately hold anybody in detention and fine them if you're not responding to a subpoena. They haven't used this in 100 years. It's like self-immolation. Now, the Buddhist monks at least had some higher cause in Saigon in doing this. Congress doesn't even have any excuse for the self-immolation.
By the way,
it's ridiculous. It all goes back, but it's the citizen acquiescence. We need to tell these people we're going to kick you out of office unless you do your job. And your job is downsize. We're going to reward you for all the laws you don't pass, and the ones you repeal, you get rewards for. Otherwise, we don't want any more of this stuff. And it goes back again. It's because the education system is so decayed. The knowledge is so low that we have citizens who are just robots out there. They don't participate. And it's much easier today if they really were serious and used the internet correctly. They get a super amount of this information. They know how their members voting. And the way they could send the greatest message to all of America is to support Tom Massey and make sure he's reelected. The one who actually does want to downsize the government, representative from Kentucky. That's where you can send a message out there.
Richard, go ahead, Richard, if you want to say anything since you're going to bounce out. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I got to go, but it's been here 90 minutes. Transparency is super important. Very little, Jeff, of the ordinary public will read those things. But the people who will read it, who will take FOIA requests and other aspects, are the people who get to talk to members of Congress, think tanks, journalists, lobbyists, and so on. And they'll say, hey, look at this from the Department of Labor. Look at this from the Defense Innovation Unit or whatever. So transparency will change how the political class holds itself accountable, because it'll provide weapons to critics based on facts. The asymmetry of information between the federal agencies and the Congress and the courts has been exploited by bureaucrats and by the status quo for a very long time. You're never going to reverse the balance, but you can tip it in the other direction, and that would be, I think, a big public benefit.
It would be, but as you know, and I know, having worked in the government, Richard, they have policies at the most important levels: never write anything down, because then it's a FOIA. Okay,
right.
Colin Powell. I mean, that's the ethos. Colin Powell tells state, don't write anything down. I mean, come on, you should be fired. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, right? So that they say the ethos has got to change.
Yes.
Otherwise, this is just kind of cosmetic. Anyway.
All right. I'm sorry, guys, but
right.
I'll join you again next week or whenever you do it.
All the time, every Monday. Every Monday, Richard.
Wonderful, Richard.
Thanks, guys.
A lot of fun with having you here. A lot of fun.
But off your point though, Bruce, it's the same kind of cycle we're talking about, where it comes back to the need to have people who we've already identified as being sociopathic, despotism, we need them to be on our side. It's like this constant circle. But we all agree though, right? And it's the same point of like how, your point last time was we need individuals need to be educated. I agree with that entirely, so we need momentum. But if we get to a point to where they are no longer, like their interest is in the problem, it's like, so like, that's like one of the statements I've heard over the years I agree with is, simple: money out of politics, right? It's not going to solve everything, but it's one of the steps that might open the door for more possible change if we can stop having them, line their pockets as they're doing all the wrong things.
I think it goes back. I think that's the cart before the horse, right? Mm-hmm. Don't worry. How much money you think was in the campaign to like George Washington?
Right.
Unanimously twice. Nobody, because there was nothing in it. Money goes where the power and the economic reward is.
Yeah.
You would not have any campaign finance problem at all if you got government out of the business of trying to control the economy. Exactly. As simple as that. You can go read all of the presidential elections, starting with George Washington, really up to probably Grover Cleveland, the tail end of the 1800s. There was never any problem of money in politics because there was nothing in it to anybody. It was when we come the Gilded Age, and then the tariffs were being used to shield certain businesses from foreign competition. So the government was trying to manipulate the economy, for their friends. That's when the money started to pour in with the J.P. Morgans and Hill and all these other people. And that's when the regulatory state began as well, with the Interstate Commerce Commission. That's the beginning of the political money problem. Until then, it was a zero. The problem we had in presidential campaigns were, what are we going to do with the surpluses in the budget, right? Can you imagine that being a campaign issue? That hasn't happened in my entire lifetime, right? So that's where we have to get back to understand the money issue will take care of itself if we downsize government.
Yeah. How much money is spent on lobbying is an indication of how successful the rent-seeking behavior business is, and that basically people have converted themselves into being rent seekers because you're either predator or you're prey. If you're not in the rent-seeking business, then money is being extracted from you by the rent seekers. And that's the government now. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, progressive, MAGA, whomever, they're all in the rent-seeking behavior. Why are people writing all these checks to people in the government? Okay, they're writing because they want influence.
Right.
Okay?
Have you guys seen
They
that
want
video?
influence because it's very worthwhile to have influence, because things flow your way if you have a lot of influence. And so if you're winning because you have influence, you're winning at somebody else's expense. You're winning at the expense of the people who don't have influence.
Yeah.
Okay?
Hey, have you guys seen that video done? It was a Princeton study that was done on, I think it was, is bribery legal in the United States? Have you guys seen that? If you wanted to watch it, you can. It's a really, really well done video. It's based on a Princeton study, and it breaks down just what you were talking about, the reality of lobbying, and how basically, if 100% of the country can want something, but if lobbyists don't, it comes down to zero possibility. Yeah, if you want to, it's there. If you want to watch
put it on right now.
Okay, it's really good.
For the last few years, I've had this sense that everything I learned as a kid about how America's government works is completely wrong. But I had no idea how bad things actually were until I saw this one graph. Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question. Does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left, at 0%, are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right, at 100%, are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea, the most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So if you've ever felt like your opinion doesn't matter and that the government doesn't really care what you think, well, you're right. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it? We pay for it with the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay for it with a tax code that's a complete mess. We pay for it with internet that's slower and more expensive, with wasteful spending, a floundering education system, a catastrophic drug war, and 1 in 5 American children born into poverty. Almost every major issue we face as a nation can be traced back to this graph. How does this happen? Well, just follow the money.
It's another 2 minutes if you'd like to watch it. It goes into the other side of it, but that's
I thought it was over.
I just wanted to give you the option to stop if it was, another 2 minutes. If it's about like the logic of why that came to be. It's a good part of it too, but that was the gist of it.
Let me put it back on. Sorry.
Okay. No worries.
Now, it's perfectly legal to buy political influence in America. Here's how it works. Let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out again if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. Not exactly the most popular idea with the public, and Congress knows that. That should be the end of it. But that's where the money comes in. It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then, those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist-written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. There's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America. And as long as it is, anyone who can spend money to buy political influence will. The solution here isn't rocket science. Make corruption illegal. We already know Congress.
From there, he goes on to give you, their kind of political, it's represent.us about what they suggest and so on, which I'm sure we could get into, but that was from 2015. I mean, it's shockingly worse today. When you look at this with the numbers.
It is, but the reason is that they don't understand that the solution isn't going after the money.
Mm-hmm.
It's going after the exercise of government power, which attracts the money.
Yes.
You downsize government, the money will disappear in 1 second, for sure. That's where we have to get the government downsized. We have to get the citizens, get the government off of our back and throw out the politicians who want to enact new laws. We need to get everybody, Thomas Massey, in the Congress, who doesn't have any ulterior motives. Until that happens, you're just trying to push, water uphill. It's not going to happen.
Well, as a thought experiment, though, hypothetically, let's take someone that let's not Massey, since let's say a hypothetical person, right? That is good intentioned, it appears. Let's just stop an Elon Musk. Like, even if it's a small government, from coming and dumping endless amounts of money in front of them, so it's like, I get your point. I agree with you. I think that's the place to start, but it's almost both simultaneously, because the money can still keep flooding into them, which will drive their actions, even if we reduce government. So the legality has to be that I don't think lobbying should exist at all. I don't think that.
You have First Amendment issues, but the fact is that pure money is not necessarily a winner. Nelson Rockefeller would have been president if it was just sheer money. I remember John Connolly. He spent millions, got one vote. Look at Jeb Bush would have won the nomination in 2016.
But it's like 98%, though.
It was just money. So I think, it's money at some point can be skeptical. I think Elon Musk's money, he probably lost single-handedly the Wisconsin Supreme Court election campaign because people were suspicious of him. They didn't want to be in his pocket. And that's not to say that money doesn't have some force, if you have two dullards both competing against each other. But I think that is the wrong way to look at this. We need to have an ethos, and people come to run for office, not because they're professional politicians. They want to liquidate their job. We want to get out of this business. I'm going to vote to try to dismantle. give the power back to you. And if we elect those people, the money issue will pay for itself. I mean, it'll go away for itself. And it can happen, even in our lifetimes. I remember William Proxmire, senator from Wisconsin. He got elected and he spent like $200 because people understood he was holding hearings. You know, he wasn't in cahoots with the military industrial complex. So it can you can be done, but it takes a particular special kind of person. So we need to get William Proxmire's and Thomas Massey's out there. And I can guarantee you, if they make one success running against the system, they'll get at least 100 to 200 copycats the next day, because the politicians are all like herd of cows. They'll follow whatever looks like is winning at that particular moment. But then that's the only way I see getting out of this deal. Thinking you're gonna, and the other thing with regard to the money issue is that there's so many different ways you can give. If it's not directly giving campaign money, you can hire their niece, or you can build a library for them. There are 50 million ways you can indirectly give people, advantages, real tangible advantages that'll be a substitute for a campaign contribution. And I can guarantee you that's what will happen if they go directly at the campaign contributions. There'll be other ways in which the payback will happen. And that's why I go back. The real payback is get government to where it ought to be, the way it wanted to be when Jefferson and Madison and Washington were around. We basically have law enforcement, a system of justice, defend ourselves from foreign attack, but otherwise the government shouldn't be doing anything.
I think as I keep arguing, and Ryan, I think that was a great video, and it's what I've always insisted, is that the most profitable business is the rent-seeking business. The most profitable, and that basically shows there's a huge return from being successful at the rent-seeking business, but it's an exclusive club. So, and it basically validates, not that I'm a fan of Bernie Sanders, but every time Bernie Sanders says there's socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor, there's a high element of truth to that, because basically we have a reverse Robin Hood government. We have the government, we have the very wealthy extracting a lot of money from everyone, so except themselves. So they're cannibalizing, it's 90% of the society, probably more, they're cannibalizing. Okay, 90% of the people, the government doesn't care what their preferences are. That's pretty much what that indicated. So basically 90% of the people have been disenfranchised by the system. So and that's not a constitutional republic. I think the only way to cure it, and I think this is a way the founders would definitely agree with, is that you don't issue debt and the government, and you don't have fiat paper money. The founders were vehemently opposed to fiat paper money. They didn't want the government to play around with money. Okay, they didn't want there any relationship between the state and the production of money. So again, but government would be spending. Government spending would look very different if the government could not print money, and if the government couldn't print money, then the cost of financing these deficits would be a lot harder. And one thing, when I don't really want to talk a lot about comments Richard made while he's not here to defend them, but I feel compelled to say one thing. When we talk about what the Europeans talk about and the things that they restrict access to market, things like that, I can tell you the single most valuable benefit we have in global trade is the seigniorage we collect having the reserve currency of the world. Okay. Mm-hmm. The reason why Trump has made threats to countries that challenge dollar hegemony is we have $37 trillion of debt outstanding. Okay. That's about it. If we take a look at all the debt in the marketplace, if we add 200 to 300 basis points in financing that debt, okay, because we're no longer the reserve currency in the world, how much more is it costing us to finance our debt if we have what the marketplace would price our debt at if we were not the reserve currency of the world? Okay, so that's why he understands the greatest benefit that we have from dollar hegemony is exactly that. It lowers the cost of our financing our deficit significantly, and which is why we kill leaders that threaten the dollar. Okay, when Libya, what was found in the correspondence released about Hillary and the discussions when Gaddafi was assassinated. Gaddafi was in the process of putting together a block of countries in Africa that were going to abandon the dollar. So Saddam Hussein, right before he got assassinated, he started talking about moving away from the dollar, and selling oil and not only exclusively invoicing it in dollars. So we it seems like any people who say I'm not going to use the dollar anymore, there seems to be some level of evidence that we assassinate them, because that's a word being used, an exorbitant privilege that we have, because it's worth a lot of money to us. And every time we increase the deficit, the value of the seigniorage we collect from being the reserve currency of the world goes up and up and up. And Trump understands that. That's why he's making the threats that if you challenge the dollar, I'll give you even more tariffs, 3,000% tariffs, or who knows what number he'll come up with. And if that doesn't work, maybe I'll go in and assassinate you or bomb you or whatever.
Or just financially dismantle your country, as we're talking about.
Yeah, but listen, I'm not denying that, but we killed a lot of foreign leaders that have nothing to do with finances. Whether it was Mossadegh,
but again, Bruce, either way, you change the incentives. Either way, Bruce, you change the incentives if people have to pay for every dollar the government spends.
Yes, the way we do that. All we needed, and Jefferson proposed this, he couldn't get it. We need a provision in the Constitution that says the government cannot borrow any money. Right?
Yes.
When they can't borrow, then you have to have a balanced budget.
Right.
Now, at the outset, because Washington was so influential de facto in his farewell address, and he said it's a blot on our moral escutcheon to give posterity a dime of debt that we used for our own generation. And so the idea of running a deficit that's being, anti-George Washington. But unfortunately, we did not, and notwithstanding Jefferson, have a prohibition upon borrowing money. Part of it was because at that time, the problem we had was we're running surpluses, not deficits. So why would you even contemplate an amendment? It would seem redundant. But that is where we need to go. It can be phased in, but we say, you know what? No borrowing whatsoever. I mean, I don't even have credit card. I have a debit card. I just grew up with a family, lived through the Depression. You just didn't borrow money. If you don't have it, don't spend it. Simple as that. We need to get the government on that kind of attitude. And the public has to support that. This is ridiculous. The government's spending all this money, and having posterity pay it back. It's it's nauseating to think that you would enjoy the benefits in your generation and have your kids pay for it. Really? You're supposed to take consideration of your kids, help them, not the opposite.
Right. And it's the whole power and influence that both of you were touching on, Jeffrey, with the reserve currency, and that allows the U.S. government to act so coercively, it's economic terrorism at the end of the day, with the way that, this is what we're kind of getting into a moment ago about the tariff point, is that, it's clear that in some cases there's, interest of the country, but you can clearly see, as you were pointing out, Bruce, there's actions that are being taken that are not in the interest of either country. It's just coercive. Interestingly, the part with Canada, where he came out and said, oh, well, they're going to recognize Palestine. We can't have a deal. Most of his supporters came out and said, what? That's in the interest, at least they saw it as the United States. And so now it's an action that's against that. There's multiple layers to this, and it is obviously completely broken at this point, and so I agree with you. I think it needs to go back to the foundational elements of this, but like the point we were making before, they're all making too much money to even concern themselves with that, so that's where the legal aspect has to come in my opinion.
Yeah, but see, this is where I think, and unfortunately the journalists, maybe we're a little bit of an antidote. They let the politicians get away with this delusion that they have anything other than ulterior motives. We have to have reporting. The people can be very, very simple-minded. They need to be reminded every single day. Everybody in power has an ulterior motive to screw you, right? They have power for its own sake. Never trust them. In anything that is cast in terms of a policy, don't worry. Underlying the policy, they got some ulterior motive they think it will help them. gain power or money. That's what this is about. That's why they're in politics, because they crave what? Two things: power and money, because they become sociopaths. And that's where the journalists, they give some kind of facial credence to what the politicians say. They should say, no, but this is just a lie. These are the 5,000 other lies that these people told. So they report on it and say, but don't believe it. It's gonna change in the next 5 minutes or 5 seconds or something like that. The shelf life of any statement out of Washington is very, very less than a head of cabbage. And the public is, they think that these are real arguments based upon what's policy. There's no policy behind any of it. It's all just personal ambition. That's all. And that's got to get through to make the American people more suspicious of letting government do anything.
Well, this is a president who prides himself with the fact that he's got significant support from evangelical Christians. Yeah. So he's walked out showing his Bible, saying he gets his guidance from, the Bible. If you take a look at something that basically both, Jews and Christians and even, Muslims acknowledge is the 10 Commandments. And how can you summarize a good part of the 10 Commandments? Basically says, don't covet anything that's not yours, okay? And what do we use government for is we covet a lot of things that are not ours, but we can't get it ourselves, so we got to form a mob to get it on our behalf, okay? That's what, quote, transfer payments are, right? It's taking money forcibly against somebody else and transferring it for you. It's the game of how successful am I at using OPM, at using other people's money? How successful I am? Can I use an agent, to steal on my behalf, and make it legal, like the video that you just produced, Ryan, about corruption being legal. Yes, we have corruption legal in this country, and we have theft legal in this country, and that's the tax system where we're not paying taxes for the collective benefit of every single person. We're choosing winners and losers. We're taking money forcibly away from some people at their cost and transferring it to other people, for their benefit. So, and we do it through preferential legislation, specific tax breaks, a lot of cronyism. So they have all sorts of methods of basically allocating wealth different than the market outcome would be, different than a voluntary process would be, in allocating wealth through this rent-seeking, behavior, and and we are an immoral people. If we were a moral people would understand that it's wrong to borrow and pass the bill off to future generations. It's to sit back and say, I'm going to improve the quality of my life by taking money away from people who don't currently have a voice, okay? So, because they're voiceless, I can steal from them, okay? So they're going to wake up, they're going to be born, they're going to come out of a womb, and they're going to realize that the day they're born, they're significantly in debt, and they'll have to be indentured servants most of their life, paying off the debt that we had a good time spending, but people don't look at it. Every time I have a conversation with somebody about this, they get angry with me, like, what's wrong with me, okay? So I say, who's going to pay this? And they just have nothing to say. But I say, so you're borrowing money, somebody has to pay this back. You don't intend on paying it back. So you're taking borrowed funds that you acknowledge you're not going to pay it back. So do you believe it never will have to be paid back, that we can keep this Ponzi scheme going at borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and the marketplace will continue to lend us, and we'll never have to pay it back, and we'll never get to a point, where someday we're going to be called on this, and then what will happen to everyone at that moment in time? Don't you care? And, I just get blank expressions like, oh, it hasn't happened so far.
Can I comment on that real quick, Jeffrey, on that person? Like, that's interesting to me. Like, so, and this is something we often talk about, is that I agree with you, and there's a very big problem there, but it's worth at least noting, whatever this indicates, that it's a combination of a lot of things, like education being used against us, or just ignorance being manufactured, to where, let me ask you this point blank, do you think that person, hypothetical, that you're talking about, and maybe you're probably thinking of somebody when you're giving that example, do you think that they're knowingly acting that way? Like, do you think they're like, I'm being immoral, or do you think they're being manipulated? Because I think it's worth noting the difference there, that people may out there just go like, I don't care, screw the future generations. But I think a lot of people in this country have just been manipulated, and maybe in ways that they should have seen through, but it's still worth noting that, so do you think those people are aware that they're acting that way?
Well, let me interject for Jeffrey,
Go ahead, Bruce.
because I think that I don't think that they feel they're manipulated. I think that what we need, this is a true revolution to get back to the understanding of why we have government at all. Why are we on this planet as human beings? The reason why we're here is to promote justice and to provide everybody an opportunity to march to their own drummer, develop their faculties on their own, and find fulfillment in their way. Because we know nobody's so saintly to get to tell other people how to live their lives and how to find fulfillment. That was the uniqueness of the United States, and it's expressed in the Declaration of Independence, even though it wasn't fully honored. That's where we have to go back. I don't think these people understand that. We should feel great as a country. Everybody gets a chance to develop their faculties, to be judged on their accomplishments and their character, and that's it. We don't celebrate a country because they got pyramids, or they went to the moon, or they go to Mars or something like that. We got there because they give each individual the dignity of choosing their own way to try to find fulfillment and honor in their own lives. Because we go back, we are not smart and moral enough to tell other people and give them a report card, you ought to act X. But that should be the barometer of our success as a country. The barometer isn't, how many ways we can attack Iran, how many ships we can build or whatever. If people want to build ships, that's fine. But it's the opportunity, it's the moral element by which we treat one another with decency, benevolence, respect, make sure we're hard work. That's the greatness of the country. That has to be restored. I don't even think the people that Jeffrey's talking about even think in these terms. I just think they wake up and they never asked, why do I exist? They just kind of go along with the herd.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that they're not even aware of that they're in that position, but they are nonetheless. In reality. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it goes what I call a huge leadership deficit. And leadership that comes not because they hold a particular office, in government or otherwise, just a moral leadership. The ones who, by their own example and wisdom, influence other people, say, yeah, that person has no ulterior motives. I want to be like that. That doesn't exist in the society anymore, All the leaders, whether Taylor Swift or the football players or the movie stars or whatever, who the hell are these leaders? Are you kidding me? They should be nowhere. The kids need to have role models that cause them to act in the right way, because it's the right thing to do, even if they might not end up in prison. And that comes because, I say, maybe even more than laws, it's the prospect of social ostracism. You don't act right, you're not going to have any friends. You just be out by your loan. That is going to be far more influential than calculating, well, I might end up in prison if I do X. Mm-hmm. That ostracism, it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there's almost nothing you can do in Washington that would cause you to be ostracized, no matter how embarrassing it ought to be to a normal person.
This is why I keep talking about, I think I mentioned it briefly in one of the last shows, the kind of almost the reverse of the same logic, that right now there's so many people out there that are willing to take advantage and lie and cheat, that what we need to start doing, like kind of like you're saying, let's just take like a social media platform like Twitter, is try to give the impression that saying the truth, doing the right thing benefits them more than the opposite. And so they'll start to lean into that because, these people are sociopathic or just opportunists. That's what a lot of people are going to do. And so I think with politicians, I mentioned like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, I don't have a good impression of her, but I nonetheless see her saying certain things lately. And I'm like, well, good. I'm glad she's standing there and saying that. And so you raise it up. Don't trust the next thing they say, question them regardless, but highlight the positive, because I think right now they're starting to recognize that people are so fed up with this, that the moment they say the thing, just like the most basic objective thing, they get flooded with praise. And it's like, okay, there is a benefit to this. So show them that, lean into that.
Now, going back to the question you asked me, Ryan, that Bruce gave his perspective on, I'll give you my answer to that question. Because I have this conversation with a lot of people. It makes them uncomfortable, because it makes them uncomfortable that I'm calling them immoral. amoral and immoral, and they feel uncomfortable. So they hear the words and they get angry with me because deep down, I think some of the words I'm saying resonates, but to them, they don't want to see themselves as being immoral and amoral people. So they hear the words make a little bit of sense to them, but they don't want to really look in the mirror and say, am I capable of really behaving this way? Because then they'd have to admit that they are, and that's an uncomfortable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than them feeling uncomfortable, they rather hate the object, that's making them feel uncomfortable, and so but I take pride in making people feel uncomfortable because I want people to feel uncomfortable, because nobody should feel comfortable. Nobody should look at the world today and feel comfortable. Really, how could anyone feel comfortable with the state of the world today? Yeah. No one should feel that comfortable.
Okay? No, but Jeffrey, I say, but listen, Jeffrey, I don't disagree with a single syllable, but my view of this, we have species narcissism. The species cannot accept the truth because it's too horrible, right? And you can't start to correct, a vice until you recognize it. All species suffer from narcissism because, as Darwin points out, his Origin of Species, they have one trait that has been cultivated for millions of years: survival for its own sake, without any moral content. That is what we have been cultivating in the species, not just U.S., every species in the world. Survival for its own sake, flourishing for its own sake, right? And so, and we don't understand, when you cultivate those traits for millions of years, you're not going to get a Socrates or a Sir Thomas More or Alexei Navalny. You're going to get brutes and crocodiles out there, and unless you educate them to, pit ambition against ambition, the whole system's going to destroy itself.
Well, I'm going to now educate people with a quote from somebody I encourage everybody to read. His name is Lysander Spooner. Yeah. So I recommend everybody to do work on reading Lysander Spooner. And I'm going to just take one of his quotes right now that I really like, but there are a lot. I've read everything that has been published that he's written. I've read it, and a lot of things quotes I could take, but this is one I like very much, amongst many I like very much. The highwayman takes solely upon himself the responsibility, danger, and crime of his own act. He does not pretend that he has any rightful claim to your money or that he intends to use it for your benefit. Furthermore, having taken your money, he leaves you as you wish him to do. He does not keep protecting you by commanding you to bow down and serve him, by requiring you to do this and forbidding you to do that. Okay? So basically, the point is, the highwayman does this at his own risk, takes it, knows that what he's doing is wrong, doesn't care, and then leaves you alone. The government takes your money, uses the same level of violence, and they keep coming back to you day after day after day after day after day. As long as you're alive, they're there. And after you're dead, they're also showing up to see what else they can take from you when you're dead, okay? To make sure you can't leave it to the people you want to leave it to. They're going to take a claim against that as well. So even when you're dead, they're still the first person in line to pick up what's there when you're dead. So and they don't take any risk, okay? They don't take any risk. So the point of his that actually being a highwayman is nobler than being a government official, okay? So and if you really think about it, it's true. It's going back to what you say, corruption being legal, okay? This is legalized theft, okay? Right. It's legalized theft of someone that's making a claim against you every day of your life. Every day you're putting some money into your pocket, they're there to take some of it out of it, and a significant part of it out of it, whether you're alive or dead. Wherever they can find the money, okay, they're doing it, okay? So, and they're doing it by force. They're doing it by coercion. None of this is voluntary. And at least the highwayman doesn't pretend that they're doing this to protect us. How much of the government money we spend on government really is for our protection? What percentage of it do you think really protects us? Okay? almost nothing of it protects us.
Whatever the byproduct is, no intention.
But Jeffrey, number one, I don't think, from my mind, I don't applaud either the government bureaucrat or the highwayman. They're both to be renounced, in my view. And secondly, you're correct. This is legalized theft. But the worst is what I call legalized first-degree murder. That's called war. Mm-hmm. You go and bomb and kill people who aren't threatening you. This is not self-defense. And that's why I go back to the species, this species narcissism. There is no other species in the whole world that organizes the way the human does on these vast industrial scale, has all of its collective genius devoted primarily to getting greater proficiency for killing one another, and fights over straws. I mean, it's everywhere. Even the Thais and the Cambodians kill each other over a temple and a border. Ethiopians and Eritreans everywhere, because this species is narcissistic and refuses to acknowledge, unless we build in ways to arrest our own worst instincts, we are going to destroy ourselves. Species narcissism prevents us from acknowledging that, and that's why we throw out separation of powers, go to war at the drop of a hat. We're killing each other. We're destroying the whole planet, and no one's saying anything. And well, this is just par for the course. Are you kidding? You got to denounce this. This is immoral. This is contrary to the people of the book, to Abraham, to Jesus, to Moses, to Muhammad, everybody. And no one wants to say anything. You know, we pick up wars. Oh, we bombed Iran one day, and we go into more weapons to Ukraine the next day, and then we got nuclear subs to threaten Russia the next day, and then we want to challenge China in the South China Sea over Taiwan. This is madness, complete madness, moral madness, and stupidity. It's because we have this species narcissism. Got to get it. No, the humans have brains, but we don't use it for the way it ought to be used. Yeah, for sure.
It's mafia tactics, in my opinion, right? I mean, that's what this comes down to. And I think that obviously we would all probably acknowledge there's an element of human nature that leans in this direction, right? But I think my argument for why we've gone that far, as you're calling it, species narcissism, is because of the representation of what we see as our leadership and the rampant lawlessness, the might makes right mindset that has allowed, the kid in preschool right now to look and be taught this is the virtuous side of the world, and then look at what they're doing, and then so it becomes this cycle of thinking that, like, if I'm strong enough, I should take what's mine, and this is, I think that's how we get away from that. But I agree with you. But I think, it's even worth considering. I don't know if you guys have read Whitney Webb's books in regard to the Epstein overlap. And the point being is that there's a very clear time frame in which you could argue that even legitimately the mafia or some level of this infiltrated the government and ultimately became part of the government. Different conversation. The point, though, is that you can clearly see that the way they're acting is strong arm tactics, like what Trump's doing with tariffs. It's very obvious. So it's worth considering all that.
Yeah, it is. It goes back. I say the only what I call uncontaminated source of power is moral suasion. You influence other people by your example, your word, your character. Everything else has ulterior motives. You do it because you whip them to go to hell, you bribe them or something like that. That's the only source of power that you can't be suspicious of. Moral suasion. Do it because it's the right thing to do, and you have a model that's actually acting that way. And we're so far gone from that situation. We don't even have it as part of a conversation, even an exotic conversation in the entire society. Not the newspapers, the social media, the old print media, nothing. What's happened to the home? The culture is decayed. We might as well be back to the era of Caligula and Nero and Claudius. That's how bad we are.
This is why I love, amongst many of the reasons why, outside of its attributes as a speculative asset, when you think about its other utilities outside of a speculative asset, why I find
Bitcoin. Yeah.
Oh, did you lose him?
His frame is frozen. Jeffrey, your frame is frozen.
It's permissionless. Okay.
Oh, Jeffrey, start over. We dropped out. You dropped out for like 10 seconds there. You said you like Bitcoin. Is that what it was?
Yes, yeah. Bitcoin. Okay, so let's think about what the attributes of Bitcoin are. It's permissionless. You don't have to grant anybody permission. Okay, it's immutable. Okay, nobody can transform it into being something different than what it is. Okay, it's not subject to debasement. It's not subject to manipulation. The ledger that records the transaction never lies. It's open to everyone. There is no information asymmetry. Everybody sees what's going on real time, okay? So the ledger always records the truth, and the ledger itself is immutable, so nobody can alter that ledger that is always telling the truth. So two parties can engage, or multiple parties can engage in transaction. They don't need to see anybody's authorization to do it. Nobody's authorization to do it. And you can accumulate as many Bitcoin as you like, but you can't influence anything about the attributes of Bitcoin. You can't change the rules. You can't change the process. You could try and create a fork, which basically says, you can create a competitive version of it, but ultimately you can't force anybody onto that competitive version. Ultimately, people have the free choice of choosing which form of, quote, cryptocurrency they want to use. And the reason why Bitcoin is the dominant one are specifically its attributes of being a completely decentralized system, okay, that's free of government control, free of any third-party influence. So, I don't think there's a greater expression of liberty. I don't think there's a greater expression of Adam Smith's invisible hand, because if you think about those people who mine Bitcoin, you have people spending money buying equipment for the right to hopefully earn, participating in validating and supporting the system, that you'll get a Bitcoin in return. So people are willing to spend money for the right of generating a Bitcoin by contributing to the infrastructure and ecosystem of Bitcoin. So basically, everybody has skin in the game. It's an incredible design, okay? And the reason why it got to $100 billion and $1 trillion in valuation faster than anything else is exactly those attributes. It's unfortunate that many people have not taken the effort to really understand those attributes. And because what's dominant in the press is, first it was just a currency used by criminals, now it's just a way of getting rich quick and getting a Lambo, but there's not really, nobody in CNBC or MSNBC or CNN is really sitting and talking very much about, the attributes of what makes Bitcoin so unique and why it's one of the most valuable assets in the world. So it doesn't have a sponsor. There's no sponsor. There's no marketing team. Okay. There's no people with Bitcoin jerseys printed by Satoshi. Satoshi didn't put out a whole bunch of Bitcoin. Yes, go around and tell everybody, market, here's a big budget I'm going to give you to promote. This growth has been completely organic. Now there are third parties like sailors and other people who have got involved in pushing this, but ultimately, they have a business model for themselves by making money off of it, but they have no influence at all in Bitcoin. There's no lobbying organization trying to sit back and say, how can I influence, so I get privileged access to Bitcoin? Okay. There's no way of getting privileged access. If you work and you earn it, you'll earn a Bitcoin because you put an effort in, and you're competing against other people who are also putting an effort in to work to earn it. So it's a completely competitive process, and you can't let me give money to Mr. Bitcoin and see if Mr. Bitcoin will give money and give some Bitcoin to me because I'm paying Mr. Bitcoin or Mrs. Bitcoin some money. It doesn't exist. That's the power of decentralization.
Well, there's another element, I
no
think,
rent-seeking behavior, because there's no return from rent-seeking behavior.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you omitted another attractive feature of the Bitcoin, and that is financial privacy, which is very important for many people. And it's not privacy just because you're trying to commit crimes. We know how the government tries to manipulate, knowledge of where your money is, freeze assets, force you into doing X, Y, Z. Given the fact that the government is trying to compile more and more data about everything you do, that financial privacy becomes quite valuable. It's a shield against government suddenly freezing all of your assets and controlling you, which they're wont to do. It gets worse and worse, FinCEN and whatever, with regard to shutting down your accounts, suspicious activity reports, and all those kinds of things are things when you're in Bitcoin you can avoid.
And they're that's the direction they're going in with the Genius Act and the stable coins. It's something that if you guys aren't familiar with Catherine Austin Fitz's work, I recommend you check it out. She's really, really knowledgeable on this. And we've had a lot of debates on the IMA about the idea of where this goes, that, you know, the CBDC was the real big issue, and it clearly is, but a stable coin version of it is exponentially worse, you know, so it's kind of a head fake. But to the Bitcoin part of it, I agree entirely. Like, I have a concern though with where it's going with this current administration, and how they at least there are efforts, I think, to try to change that direction, Jeffrey. And that's what I get worried about, is there are elements of what they're trying to do that I think completely, like for what Bruce pointed out, like the financial element of it, that I think, you know, simply put, I think we all would likely agree that Bitcoin, or just that, you know, cryptocurrency in general, going back to the white paper, for example, was literally about challenging this system. And now it's been sort of bastardized into, like you said, to get a Lambo, you know, and it's like, it's just kind of depressing for somebody like me that's been following it this whole time, to see it just kind of take this hard turn into profit and almost bolstering the system that it was supposed to change, you know. And there's also discussions we could get into about, you know, CPU power and the, you know, double spending and the issues that it could build into with what they're trying to do. But those are, you know, more in-depth conversations for cryptocurrency people. But either way, I agree with the sentiment. I just worry about how, you know, the money aspect might drive people in for the wrong reasons, and that can be used against us.
Let me make it easy. I said, and I might have been the first person to say it, but I'm not sure, you know, because I've heard a lot of people say it after. But I was asked a question, like in 2014, at the talk I gave, and you know, and people, and then people 2014, 2015, when people were talking about, well, could there be other cryptocurrencies or whatever? And I said, look, I'm going to tell you something that you can assume is a good rule of thumb, and apply this as a good rule of thumb. It's a good heuristic. Okay, if it's not Bitcoin, it's a shit coin. Okay, so there's Bitcoin. And once people talk about crypto, okay, and not about Bitcoin, assume they're a shitcoiner and a bullshitter, okay? So when people use the word crypto, okay, they're a bullshitter. When they use the word Bitcoin, that's the person you should listen to, in my opinion, and I have not changed, okay? If you're not a Bitcoiner, you're a shitcoiner. If you're talking about crypto, you're a shitcoiner.
I disagree.
Crypto, you're full of shit, okay? The only legitimate people are Bitcoiners, okay? Shitcoiners are the ones paying money in all these campaigns to influence politics, so they have they get privileges about the issuing and trading of their shitcoins, okay? They're like and they don't care about the attributes that Bruce just talked about, is, you know, financial privacy, okay? They're willing to surrender financial privacy. They don't care about financial privacy. And really what they're doing is not very innovative, okay? And the whole issue of these, quote, stable coins, okay? One time I was a keynote speaker in the conference in New York. And so I just knew a friend of mine invited me to speak. So I said, okay, you know, a friend of mine asked me, I'll go and I'll show up for the conference to speak, because it was somebody I knew and was friendly with. So I didn't want to say no. So I got up there, but I had no idea who the sponsor of the conference was. So before I was introduced, the host of the conference that paid for the conference, the sponsor of the conference, gave a little talk. They were an issue of a stable coin. So for me, I never prepared a speech. I just, you know, I got up there and I talked whatever I wanted, whatever I was inspired at the moment I got on stage. So I listened to this guy talk about a stable coin. So I said, you know, I was here to give a talk about Bitcoin, but I've decided not to give a talk about Bitcoin. I'm going to talk about why stable coins are shit coins. Okay. So what I want to make sure is that when I leave this conference, okay, that this guy's business model doesn't succeed. So I gave this talk about, you know, stable, and yes, his stable coin failed. So, but you know, as they should all fail. So first, the term stable coin. Okay, if a stable coin is backed by fiat money, a stable coin is only stable in reference to itself. What we want is stability with respect to the purchasing power of money. Okay. Not something that's stable in and of itself, only with respect to itself and not with respect to its utility. So the utility should be, if I accumulate this, my purchasing power is preserved. So a stable coin doesn't preserve any more purchasing power than the fiat money that is collateralizing it. So it's stable with respect to what? Itself. Okay. But but money should be either a good store of value or good medium of exchange. Okay. Good form of payment. So if it's going down in value, because there's inflation, okay, and it's being debased, that's not very good. That's not stable with respect to purchasing power. And the whole idea is to be stable with respect to purchasing power, and it's not stable with respect to purchasing power. So stablecoin is just a bad name. It's a marketing tool. It's bullshit words. Okay, so and given the fact that all these exchanges that are issuing these stable coins and trading these stable coins are all agreeing to cooperate and report everything, all activity, there's probably more reporting of activity of stable coins than your checks that are passing around to people. So, so there's no financial privacy. There's a complete absence of financial privacy. If anything, the government is learning more about what you're doing than they did in the past.
By design.
So whether the government issues it itself or it gets third parties to issue it on its behalf and requires those third parties to give it a lot more information that they probably could not get, because a lot of times governments have rules about privacy. But I could basically create a whole bunch of rules that say, if you want a license, this is all the information you need to collect, and you got to give it all to me. Now the government has deputized people without the government spending any money. The government is extracting rent from getting other people to do it rather than the government doing itself, yet it gets all the same benefits. So it's lost about people saying somehow privately issued CBDs, privately issued stable coins are better than government issued stable coins. No, they're all evil.
Way worse. Yeah.
They're all evil.
Well, what do you think about outside of stable coins, though? Like you mentioned in the beginning, I think so. I don't know if you were going in the direction of just stable coins, but you had said all the rest. What about something like Monero, for example? So Bitcoin today, Monero is a completely private. There are elements to Bitcoin that are completely private. In regard to Monero, it is completely private, but the reason it gets pushed back is because that's not what the government wants. They don't want something that can actually be completely surveillable. I just would disagree on the thing that everything but Bitcoin is bad. I think there's a lot of things out there that are leading in the direction that I think Bitcoin originally was going toward, that now has kind of been redesigned. But I know where you're going with that in general. Like there's a lot of nonsense out there. Bitcoin, for example, is nonsense.
Yeah, the ecosystem around Bitcoin is being created, but Bitcoin itself is not being redesigned. Okay.
No, I didn't say that, but this is probably not for, we could get into a conversation about the forks and the difference in regard to that, but I agree with you in the general sense about where it should be going. But like you're saying, the way the government is applying it and utilizing it and convincing people that it should be something that you invest in and hold as opposed to, which is always their choice, but as opposed to being an actual, like the first point you made about being a form of transactional currency, which was what the white paper outlined, and so we're going in the wrong direction, I think, with the ethos of it, and I think that's a problem. But what I really was getting at is that I think there are other versions, like Chainlink, for example, is a really valuable. It's not a currency, but it is still a crypto. They call it cryptocurrency. It's a technological product, but it's like a sort of like the connective tissue between the old and the new system. And it seems to be very important, and it seems to be valuable. So I just think there are some out there that are, not all shit coins outside of Bitcoin. That's all I was getting at. So
I think one is, if it's not proof of work, it's a shit coin. Okay. Second is, if anyone has raised money to create the currency, and they've given themselves pre-mined tokens, if they rewarded themselves and they're actively engaged in promoting the business, okay, they probably issued a security. Okay. And to the extent it's an unlicensed security. And so therefore it's not really permissionless. So once it's no longer permissionless, it's a shit coin. Okay. Because once it's no longer permissionless, the government can come in and say, I want you to change the ledger or I'm putting you out of business. The government can't do that to Bitcoin. Okay. Bitcoin from its initial design was designed to be anti-fragile with respect to the government.
But see, this is where you get into the different.
That's why they didn't go out and raise money. There was never a project. All Bitcoin did is Satoshi wrote a paper and put the paper in circulation. That was it.
Right.
Okay?
Listen. Let me, Jeffrey and Ryan. I'm not I'm technological in the dark ages, but I know politics and power. There's no way that the government is going to ultimately keep their hands off of Bitcoin. If that's where the wealth is and it's getting away, they'll change the statute, they'll change the regulation. They're coming for it. That is the way that the government works. It's all about power, and anything outside the government control, they get terrified about, right?
I agree.
That's the nature of power. When you look at the goal of the government is not liberty for the citizens, it's how can we control and govern the whole world, which is what our mentality is right now. It's just a matter of time, and the government will destroy Bitcoin because Bitcoin is outside of their realm.
Well, but
it's a matter of whether it comes in 5 years or 10 years. That's what's going to happen unless we go back to reorienting our understanding of why we exist as a government. Celebrate liberty, the march of the mind. Everybody gets to march to their own drummer, and that is the success of the government. Not big government is not. It should be a sideshow. It simply cultivates.
Let me say something. If I with a coin that has had with a coin that was issued with an original sin of really being required to having asked for permission of issuing it and didn't, the government at any point in time can go back and say, you didn't ask for permission, I'm delisting it, okay? And you could go to court, you could sue the government, and if the government wants to delist it, it can easily prove that that it was a security, was an unregistered security, and they could do two things. They could either kill it, or they could say, I'm letting you live, but you now work for me, okay? So far, that's what government's been doing. They go to Binance and other people, and they say, okay, I'll let you live, but this is the price you have to pay for me letting you live. But they have somebody to go after because there's a creator of that, okay?
Right.
There's somebody who's a creator of that, okay? It doesn't matter whether you know Satoshi or not. You call up Satoshi, and Satoshi said, all I did was write a paper, okay? The paper's in the public domain. I have no control over it. You can threaten me with all you want, but I have no influence. I took no compensation. I didn't do anything but write a paper. That's all I did. I published a paper.
Okay, so this is where the forks
come. You get me for publishing a paper. I put a paper in the public domain. That's it. And people decided, hey, this paper's cool. And this person started mining, and this person started mining, and this person started mining. And all these people who are mining, they're not cooperating with each other. Okay, they're all competing against each other. So no one miner on their own can create a Bitcoin.
Right. But so this is where the fork comes in. And so since we're getting into it, just really quickly, the point for me, and we probably disagree on this, we might. I'm of the mind that if you go back to the origin, you read the white paper and you understand the direction that it was outlined to go, that we got to the point to which there was a deviation, the first fork. Now, the original deviation to Bitcoin Cash continued to maintain the original idea of this. And I've known people debate about this. It's like blasphemy in the Bitcoin community. The point was that, in my opinion, that then further down the line, Bitcoin Satoshi vision continued still. And both of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin itself have gone away from the original outline. Now, maybe that's what the world wants. Maybe that's what Satoshi today would go, I agree with, if he was going to talk about it. But all we have is the original white paper and the direction that it's taken. And you can, basically what Bitcoin has become. Let me finish my one thought and then you can jump in. The way Bitcoin has gone today to the endpoint of like BTC, the main Bitcoin, is not, in my opinion, the original vision. That would be Satoshi vision, that the BSV. And Bitcoin itself has been changed to the point to where what we're talking about, to a point to where it has been manipulated to the point to where it's not the original idea and it can be manipulated by the government. And I don't mean in the sense of the origin points we're talking about of financial security or of some level of opaque transactions, but I mean where they're using it today has turned it into the opposite of what it originally was. And so I think it's been bastardized. And so now my last point is that, so if we're talking about the two, I agree with everything you're saying, but insofar as we still maintain that white page vision or white paper vision versus what BTC is today. Now it's deep for a lot of people to listen to. But
yeah, and I just add this, Jeffrey, my observation is when the government wants to destroy something, it doesn't have to use reason. It just declares it, and it says an arm is a leg, a head is a foot, or whatever. Patriotism is then treason, and treason is patriotism. They'll make up anything they want to. And with the ulterior motive, hey, you're exercising power outside of my domain. That's what's going to happen. You have all the reason in your favor, Jeffrey, but unfortunately, the world doesn't work by reason. It works by sheer power and mischief. That's all, you know.
I think the government will find it more difficult to kill Bitcoin.
It may be, but they'll do it anyway, even if it means the government goes under.
Now they might be able to confiscate the wealth of people holding Bitcoin in the U.S.
Yeah.
But all you need to do is move the mining out of it, and what can they control?
Well, right now, you have no control. They
can prevent Americans from owning it, and they can prevent Americans from mining it. But what else can they control?
They can try to control the whole world. Jeffrey, the species is filled with histories of nations destroying themselves.
Bruce, if I may, just to address this exact question. So you have right now you've got two major, like right now you have, of all the companies, there's two major companies that do mining, not owning, which is a whole other thing, but owning the mining CPU power, that collectively own 51% plus of the power. In the white paper, it specifically notates that if you get to a point to where if you get to a point to where I think it says non-honest nodes or dishonest nodes control more than 51% of the processing, you can get to the point of things that are called double spending. But I think that's where we might be.
A lot of the miners are mining farms, so they're mining on behalf of other people.
No, okay, but what I'm saying is two major companies that have these massive things collectively.
It's not like they have governance control over 51%. Because a lot of the capacity is them doing things that other people and Satoshi in the debate Satoshi believed that if you get even a coordination and of people who collectively could have 51%, whether they could really corrupt the ledger, Satoshi himself didn't really think that would be the case as long as there remained honest
notes out exactly there. That's my point, though. I don't think any of us know for sure, but I think the issue there is what I'm talking about. The worry.
What we know is we've had now more than 15 years of experience without there being anything corruption, and there's no indication that anyone distrusts that the ledger is not anything but completely honest. Okay, the fact I'm not going to say never say never, so I'm not going to say that it never could happen. But the question is what's the probability it will happen as compared to the probability of any other thing that could happen? Yes, wealth in any form can be confiscated. The question is which is the most portable? Okay, is gold portable, or a wallet that holds $1 trillion of Bitcoin in it? Which is more portable? Which is the one? Which is the easier one to hide? Okay, which is the easier one to try and figure out in a disclosure process that anyone really has? Okay, yes, you can go through chain analysis and things like that and try and see. But if people have been basically mining and keeping and had virgin tokens are not trackable or traceable. So for virgin tokens, you're not going to find those who have mined tokens and kept it. You're just not going to find. They're completely anonymous. Okay. Anyone who's moved it around, they're not anonymous. But if people have mined it and kept and virgin tokens, they're completely anonymous. Mm-hmm. And nobody will ever know how many they own or hold. So but then going back to the vision of, is it a speculative asset or is it a means of payment? Okay, at the time Satoshi paper, we have to give some context to this. Satoshi paper was published came out and published at probably the bottom of the financial crisis, a bottom at a point in time when the whole financial system was bankrupt. Okay, so if the whole financial system implodes, how do we exchange value with each other? So when people were worried about the financial system imploding, what was the alternative means of people being able to exchange value with each other? So I think the timing of and I have, since I don't know Satoshi personally, I don't know what the motivation was to release the paper at that point in time, but I believe the point in time was timed to the circumstances, and the circumstances was the whole global financial system going to collapse? Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Was it going to collapse? At that point in time, before the government came in and started bailing out the banks. And the first one bailout was guaranteeing all the liabilities of the financial system. They didn't just guarantee the financial, they didn't only guarantee the liabilities of the whole banking system. They guaranteed the liabilities issued by Ford Motor Credit, GM Motor Credit, by GE Credit. So they were backing up commercial paper issued by companies that they viewed as strategically important. So they went up and back for free. They just said, I'm giving a guarantee to everyone on their debt. Prior to that, what the TED spread was, the spread at which banks were financing themselves. Banks were financing themselves at a marginal cost that was probably 250, 300 basis points above their average return on their assets. So basically, the banks in a matter of months would have all been broke. They all would have been undercapitalized, and then what I had to see is when you have a whole undercapitalized system, and then the banks don't want to even lend themselves money, in the Fed funds market, because they don't know if they could trust the counterparty they're lending their money, because the whole system is broke. So that was in that context is when the white paper was issued. Okay. There's something called Gresham's Law. Okay. Gresham's Law says, bad money forces good money out of circulation. So if that was the death of paper money, then maybe Bitcoin would have emerged as a means of payment. But paper money survived. Okay? Paper money survived. So given the fact that paper money survived, and you're holding various forms of money, the money you most want to get rid of is the shittiest money that you have. Okay? Bitcoin can't be debased. Fiat money is debased the minute it's issued. I mean, think about that, because of the fact that the Fed sets a target of 2.5% inflation. That means the minute the Fed gives a dollar, prints some money, and it goes to circulation to you, the Fed is working to make that money debased. They're working to reduce the purchasing power of the money. So given the fact that the person who is issuing that money is reducing its purchasing power, the longer you hold on to it, the more your purchasing power will be reduced. So that's the best form of money to spend. So,
on a side note to that, that's one of the aspects of CBDCs or even the private is the expiring money aspect. TED talks about that to where it just disappears after a year.
So why would I hold dollars and spend Bitcoin? Okay. Why would I want to hold dollars when I know every day the person that issued the dollar to me is trying to debase it? Okay. And they're successfully working to debase it. Okay. So I have a better form of money. So why am I spending my good form of money? Okay. And not holding. So given the fact that fiat paper money survived, the intelligent thing to do with good money is to hold it and spend your shitty money. So, so if fiat money had not survived, then the replacement could have been the better money, given the fact that fiat money didn't survive, but fiat money did survive. So as long as the fiat money did survive, okay, why would I hold on to my my shitty money that's being debased? No, I want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, because every day I hold on to it, I'm getting poorer.
I'm still in the sound money direction, quite frankly. I have crypto as well, but gold, silver is where I'm leaning into. Unfortunately, I do have to break off pretty soon for next interview. But I love this conversation, by the way. There's so much to get into around this, and there's so many different opinions in it. And I don't think any of us really know, like in some of these grander ways, for sure where it will end up. But I think it's worth having these conversations because it's I think we all can agree that where the current financial system is in this country is just prime for collapse, and it is broken. And I think the dollar itself is there. I think that's why the current system is transitioning us into this new system, because that's where we're going. And I'm waiting for them to drop that last shoe where it sort of is, a collapse or a problem, but don't worry, we have your money saved in digital currency. Here you go, handing it back to you. And I think that's where one of the shifts will be, but I'll leave it on that note. But good talking with you guys today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to go back and revisit the Federal Reserve in 1913. Why did we have that system anyway? Again, that gets the government involved in the monetary issue. And that's what we got to go revisit. As imperfect as the private sphere is, it's almost always better than government involvement because the ulterior motives. And that's what people think that, as soon as you can find an imperfection in the private system, that means you got to change it. No, it means that you keep it unless you got a cure that's not worse than the disease. And people keep jumping, and they don't say, well, let's keep it until we know that the cure is better than the disease. Cure turns out to be worse than the disease 99 times out of 100. And we keep repeating the same folly over and over and over again. It's amazing how stupid this species is. Learns nothing, forgets nothing.
And even though there's a book that says the Bitcoin standard, while I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm unabashedly a Bitcoiner. I have most of my net worth in Bitcoin. What I advocate for, consistent with my philosophy of an absence of government, an absence of somebody telling me what to do, that's my responsibility to figure out for myself what I should be doing without the help of anyone else. Or if anybody gives me help, it's because I asked and I'm willing to accept it and at my own judgment, is abolish the Fed and abolish legal tender laws and let people decide how they want to exchange value. So let competition determine, who the winner is. Let the marketplace determine, which is a function of our own behavior, determines who the winners and the losers are, and only our own behavior. And so I don't want to force anybody onto Bitcoin. Of course, I'm always willing to talk about why I love Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, what I just want is, I don't want a law giving preferences or privileges to Bitcoin. I want the government out of this business, and the people will decide, because we used to have, at the founding of this country, there were a lot of things, a lot of different currencies in circulation. So, and people decided for themselves, how they would exchange value. And I think we should go back to that. Get rid of the Fed, get rid of legal tender laws, let people decide for themselves how they want to exchange value. Ryan, do we have time? Maybe I may be off topic, but do we have time to conclude this by maybe loading up the
Charlie Chaplin, the great dictator.
I literally just added it for you right there at the bottom. Your mind.
So this time we're going to give the last word.
Yeah, Charlie Chaplin.
To Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, how come I can't? Oh, there we
go.
Well,
great talking with you guys again. I always enjoy this.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of the system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, the misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Quite the video. It's powerful.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the same. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. Despite Charlie Chaplin, that's where we are.
Yeah. Unfortunately for time, I do have to break off, guys. I really,
Okay.
really, it's a great way to end that.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you guys. I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks,
Bye.
Jeffrey.
Bye.
See you later.